You've been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. They said you take things too personally, you think too much, you feel too deeply. But if that were true, why are you the one who notices what others ignore? Why are you the one who senses when something is wrong before a single word is spoken? Why do crowded rooms drain you while shallow conversations leave you empty? The truth is, you're not too sensitive. You're deeply aware, and awareness in a numb world feels like pain. Buddhist wisdom has taught for centuries that to see clearly is both a burden and a gift. Because when illusion fades, reality appears fragile, impermanent, and painfully honest. You start seeing through masks, through noise, through the endless distractions people use to avoid themselves. And suddenly, the game everyone is playing stops making sense. The chasing, the competing, the pretending. It all feels hollow because your mind is no longer satisfied with surface-level living. It wants truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to relax. The pressure to shut down your feelings will fade. The confusion about why you feel different will start to clear. And instead of seeing your depth as weakness, you will begin to see it as perception, as clarity, as the beginning of awakening. You will learn how to carry awareness without drowning in it, how to stay open without being overwhelmed, how to protect your energy without hardening your heart. This is not just another audio to fall asleep to. This is the moment you stop apologizing for who you are. You're not too sensitive. You're deeply aware. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something in you already knows this feeling. The quiet discomfort when you see too much, understand too quickly, and realize you can't return to the comforting ignorance you once had. It's the moment awareness stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like weight. And once that door opens, it never fully closes again. There comes a point in a person's life when the usual distractions stop working. The noise that once entertained you begins to feel like static. The conversations that once filled time begin to feel scripted. The routines that once felt safe begin to feel mechanical, like watching yourself repeat the same day in different clothing. This shift does not happen because you became negative or broken. It happens because your mind stopped numbing reality. Most people move through life protected by invisible filters. These filters soften harsh truths, blur uncomfortable details, and allow them to function without constantly questioning everything. They wake up, follow the same patterns, chase the same goals, and rarely stop to ask whether any of it truly satisfies them. These illusions are not deliberate lies. They are psychological cushions that make existence easier to carry. Heightened awareness quietly dissolves those cushions. You begin to notice the exhaustion behind forced smiles, the tension hidden in polite conversations, the way people perform roles rather than express who they are. You see how many interactions are guided by fear of rejection rather than genuine connection. Even celebrations start to feel strange, as if everyone is trying to convince themselves they are happy rather than actually feeling it. This clarity can feel isolating because it removes the comfort of shared illusion. When others laugh at things that now feel hollow to you, you may wonder what changed. When people become excited about status, trends, or approval, you may feel detached rather than impressed. It is not arrogance. It is the result of seeing the machinery behind the performance. Awareness also sharpens your perception of suffering. You notice the tired cashier who pretends to be cheerful. You sense when a friend says, "I'm fine," but means the opposite. You pick up on emotional undercurrents that others either cannot detect or choose to ignore. This constant perception can exhaust your nervous system because your mind processes layers of information at the same time. Buddhist teachings describe this as the mind beginning to wake up from automatic living. Instead of reacting blindly, you observe. Instead of being absorbed in distractions, you notice the nature of experience itself. You see how quickly moods change, how fragile plans are, how temporary everything is. What once felt solid now feels fluid. Impermanence stops being a concept and becomes a lived experience. This realization can produce a quiet grief. Not because life is meaningless, but because you recognize how fragile and fleeting everything is. You become aware that every conversation, every moment, every relationship is temporary. Even joy carries a subtle awareness that it will not last forever. This is not pessimism, it is clarity without denial. People often misunderstand this stage. They assume awareness should feel peaceful, but in reality, it often begins as disorientation. Your old motivations lose their pull, yet new ones have not fully formed. You may feel suspended between two ways of living, unable to return to unconscious comfort, but not yet settled into conscious peace. The mind searches for something solid to hold on to and finds nothing permanent. At the same time, heightened awareness exposes the ways people escape themselves. Endless scrolling, constant busyness, compulsive entertainment. These behaviors are not harmless habits. They are attempts to avoid stillness, because stillness forces confrontation with what lies underneath. When you stop numbing yourself, silence becomes loud. Thoughts become clearer. Emotions surface without distraction to suppress them. This can feel overwhelming at first, like stepping into bright sunlight after years in dim light, but slowly your perception adjusts. You begin to recognize patterns in your own reactions. You see how fear influences decisions, how attachment creates anxiety, how expectations generate disappointment. Instead of blaming circumstances, you start observing the mind itself. This observation creates distance between you and your thoughts. For the first time, you realize that not every emotion needs to control you. You can feel sadness without becoming it. You can experience anger without acting on it. You can notice anxiety without believing its predictions. Awareness gives you the space to respond instead of react. However, this space also removes excuses. Once you see clearly, pretending not to know becomes impossible. You cannot convince yourself that temporary pleasures will fill permanent emptiness. You cannot ignore contradictions between your values and your actions. You cannot blindly follow paths that feel wrong just because others expect it. Clarity demands honesty. This honesty may lead you to reevaluate relationships, habits, and goals. Some connections may feel misaligned because they were built on versions of you that no longer exist. Certain ambitions may lose meaning because they were motivated by approval rather than authenticity. Letting go of these things can feel like loss, even when it is necessary. Awareness is not only about seeing truth outside of you, it is about seeing truth within you. You begin to notice how often you sought validation, how much energy you spent trying to fit expectations, how fear shaped your choices. This recognition is not meant to create shame, it is meant to create freedom. When you see the patterns clearly, you are no longer trapped inside them. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes that suffering does not come from awareness itself, but from resistance to what awareness reveals. Fighting reality creates tension. Accepting it creates space. Acceptance does not mean approval or passivity. It means acknowledging what is true without adding unnecessary struggle. With practice, heightened awareness transforms from burden into precision. Your sensitivity becomes guidance rather than weakness. You learn when to engage and when to step back. You become selective with your energy because you understand its value. Instead of absorbing every emotion in the room, you develop the ability to witness without drowning. This shift brings a different kind of strength. Quiet, grounded, steady. You stop needing constant stimulation because you discover depth in simple moments. A calm breath, a genuine conversation, the sound of rain, the warmth of sunlight. Things that once seemed ordinary now feel rich with presence. Awareness does not only expose pain, it also reveals subtle beauty that distraction once hid. Life becomes less about chasing intensity and more about experiencing fully. You start recognizing that most people are not intentionally shallow. They are protecting themselves in the only way they know. Their distractions are shields against fear, loneliness, and uncertainty. Seeing this softens judgment and replaces it with compassion. You understand that numbness is not strength, it is survival. This understanding allows you to remain open without becoming cynical. Gradually, the weight of perception becomes easier to carry. Not because reality changes, but because your relationship to it changes. You learn to rest in awareness instead of fighting it. You discover that clarity can coexist with peace. The same perception that once overwhelmed you becomes the foundation of wisdom. And something unexpected happens. You begin to feel less alone, not because others suddenly understand you, but because you understand yourself. The confusion about why you felt different dissolves. You stop trying to shrink your depth to fit into spaces that cannot hold it. You stop apologizing for noticing what others overlook. You realize that awareness was never the enemy. It was the doorway. What once felt like a curse becomes a compass. It guides you toward authenticity, toward meaningful connection, toward a life aligned with truth rather than illusion. The burden of unfiltered perception turns into the clarity that keeps you from wasting your life on things that do not matter. And although the world may still feel loud, rushed, and distracted, something inside you becomes steady. You can see clearly without losing yourself. You can feel deeply without breaking. You can walk through illusion without being consumed by it. This is not the end of discomfort, but it is the beginning of peace, grounded in reality rather than fantasy. As awareness becomes steady, something else becomes louder. Not noise from the world, but a kind of inner pull that refuses to let suffering stay invisible. Once the mind stops numbing reality, it also stops being able to pretend that other people's pain is none of your business. You don't just notice what is happening, you feel what it costs. And that is where sensitivity often stops feeling like perception and starts feeling like bruising. There's a strange moment that happens after clarity settles in. You begin to realize the world is not only distracted, it is defended. People don't just ignore suffering because they are cruel. They ignore it because they cannot afford to feel it and still function the way they've been trained to function. Indifference becomes a kind of social currency. It looks like strength. It looks like control. It gets rewarded with status, speed, and applause. And when you are the person who still feels, still cares, still notices, it can feel like you are walking against the flow of a cold river. Something in you wonders quietly why having a heart feels like carrying a wound. Empathy can feel like pain because it makes you porous, it makes you receptive, it lets life in. And in a world full of pressure, greed, injustice, loneliness, and unspoken grief, letting life in can hurt. Not the dramatic kind of hurt that people can see, but the quiet kind that accumulates. The kind that makes you tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. The kind that makes you question why you react so deeply to things everyone else shrugs off. This is where Buddhist wisdom becomes essential, because Buddhism never praises compassion as a simple virtue without consequences. It respects compassion as power, but it also warns about compassion without wisdom, because compassion without wisdom becomes drowning. Many sensitive people confuse empathy with responsibility. They feel another person's sadness, and without realizing it, they begin to carry it as if it belongs to them. They hear someone's problems, and their mind immediately starts trying to solve them, fix them, rescue them. They sense someone's emotional weight, and their body reacts as if it must absorb it to prove love. Over time, they become exhausted, resentful, and confused, not because they were wrong to care, but because they cared without boundaries. In Buddhist terms, this is compassion mixed with attachment. Attachment is not only clinging to pleasure, it is clinging to outcomes. It is the mind saying, I must change this person's pain, or I must make sure they are okay, or if they suffer, it means I failed. That kind of empathy becomes pain because it is built on control. It tries to manage what cannot be managed. It tries to heal what the other person is not ready to heal. It tries to save what life itself may be unfolding in its own time. You can love someone and still not be able to carry their karma for them. Karma, in the Buddhist sense, is not punishment. It is cause and effect. It is the natural unfolding of choices, habits, and consequences. People are shaped by what they repeat, and one of the hardest truths for deeply empathetic people is this: some people will keep choosing what hurts them until they are ready to stop. No amount of your caring can replace their willingness. No amount of your sacrifice can substitute for their growth. If you do not understand this, empathy turns into self-destruction. This is why empathy feels like pain in a world that rewards indifference. Because indifference looks like freedom. Indifference looks like peace. Indifference looks like someone who is unbothered. Meanwhile, you feel everything, and it makes you look weak. People may even shame you for it. They may call you soft. They may say you think too much. They may act like your concern is unnecessary. But the truth is, many people praise indifference because it protects them from facing themselves. Indifference is often just numbness dressed up as confidence. It is often unresolved fear that has learned to shut the heart down. It is often emotional avoidance that has become socially acceptable. In a world that runs on speed, caring slows you down. It makes you stop. It makes you consider consequences. It makes you see the human cost behind everything. A deeply empathetic person cannot enjoy comfort the same way when they see who pays for it. This can create internal conflict. Part of you wants to live normally, to relax, to stop thinking, to stop feeling, but another part of you refuses to go blind again. And that refusal is not a mistake. It is the sign of conscience. It is the sign of sensitivity becoming awareness. Still, empathy without wisdom becomes suffering because it lacks skill. It is like holding fire with bare hands. The intention is pure, but the method is painful. Buddhist compassion is not emotional flooding. Buddhist compassion is clarity plus kindness. It is the ability to see suffering accurately, understand its causes, and respond in a way that helps rather than harms. That is why Buddhism pairs compassion with wisdom. Wisdom is what prevents compassion from becoming addiction. One form of wisdom is learning to recognize the difference between feeling with someone and feeling as someone. Feeling with someone means you remain present, open, and caring, while still staying grounded in your own center. Feeling as someone means you lose yourself inside their emotions. You begin to mirror their pain so completely that you cannot tell where you end and they begin. Many sensitive people do this without realizing it because they learned early that love means absorbing. But absorbing is not love. Absorbing is losing. When you absorb, you don't actually help the other person. You simply become another person drowning. And now there are two people in pain instead of one. Another form of wisdom is understanding that compassion does not require you to suffer. This is a difficult belief to release because many people were taught that if you care, you must hurt. That if you don't feel broken by someone else's hardship, you must not truly love them. But Buddhism teaches a more stable compassion, a compassion that stays warm without collapsing. This is sometimes called equanimity. Equanimity is not coldness, it is emotional balance. It is the ability to stay steady in the presence of suffering without turning away and without being swept away. Equanimity is what allows compassion to last. Without equanimity, empathy becomes burnout. You care intensely, then collapse, then shut down, then feel guilty, then care again, then collapse again. It becomes a painful cycle. Over time, you start resenting the very people you wanted to help, not because they did something evil, but because you gave beyond what you could sustainably give. When you give from guilt, you will eventually give with anger. Buddhist wisdom encourages compassion that is clean. Clean compassion means you help because it is aligned with your values, not because you are afraid of being disliked. Clean compassion means you support without controlling. It means you care without needing to be needed. It means you offer kindness without turning it into a contract. This is where many sensitive people struggle because they secretly use empathy to secure connection. They overgive to prevent abandonment. They become the healer to avoid being left. They become the listener so they don't have to reveal their own pain. Their empathy becomes a strategy for safety. The tragedy is that the world rewards that kind of empathy until it drains you. People will happily take your emotional labor. They will call you strong when you are carrying too much. They will call you kind when you are overextending. And the more you give, the more it becomes expected. Then the one day you stop, you're called selfish. This is why compassion must be paired with discernment. Discernment is not judgment. It is seeing clearly where your energy goes. It is recognizing who respects your boundaries and who only likes you when you are useful. It is noticing who grows from your support and who stays dependent on it. It is learning the painful lesson that some people don't want healing. They want relief without change. Wisdom asks, is my compassion helping this person become stronger, or is it helping them stay the same? This question changes everything. Empathy becomes painful when it turns into a constant exposure to human suffering without a framework to process it. Sensitive people often feel like they are walking through life with open nerve endings. They feel the sadness of strangers, the tension of rooms, the cruelty in comments, the despair behind jokes. And because they are deeply aware, they cannot simply ignore it. But you are not meant to carry the entire world in your chest. Buddhism teaches that compassion does not mean taking responsibility for everything. Compassion means wishing well and acting skillfully where you can, while accepting what you cannot control. It means being available without being consumed. It means helping without believing you can fix life itself. This is the difference between compassion and saviorhood. Saviorhood is ego mixed with empathy. It is the unconscious belief that your value comes from being the one who rescues. It sounds noble, but it is often driven by a hidden need to feel needed. And it creates suffering because it guarantees disappointment. People do not always change. Life does not always reward goodness quickly. Some problems are bigger than one person's effort. When your compassion becomes your identity, every failure feels personal. Wisdom teaches humility. Humility says, I will do what I can with love, but I will not pretend I control outcomes. Humility is what keeps compassion from turning into despair. Another Buddhist insight is that empathy becomes painful when it lacks inner refuge. If you don't have a place inside you that feels stable, then every external suffering shakes you. You become like a boat without an anchor. You drift into everyone's storms. Inner refuge is built through practice. It can be mindfulness, it can be meditation, it can be simple awareness of breath. It can be the discipline of returning to your body when your mind starts absorbing everything outside you. Over time, you develop an internal home. Then, when you encounter suffering, you can respond from steadiness rather than panic. Steady compassion is far more helpful than emotional collapse. Sensitive people often think their pain proves their empathy is real, but pain is not proof. Presence is proof. Consistency is proof. Skill is proof. Another reason empathy feels like pain is because the world often punishes it. People take advantage of kind hearts. They exploit those who listen. They unload on those who care. And if you have been betrayed or used before, your nervous system learns to associate caring with danger. So you become trapped between two fears. You fear becoming hard because you don't want to lose your humanity. But you also fear staying soft, because softness has cost you before. Buddhism offers a third path, the soft heart with strong boundaries, not defensive walls, but clear limits. Boundaries are compassion for yourself. Without boundaries, empathy becomes self-abandonment. You say yes when you mean no. You stay when you should leave. You over-explain, over-give, over-tolerate, and then you wonder why you are drained. Buddhist compassion begins with non-harming. That includes not harming yourself through constant self-sacrifice. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is step back. Not because you don't care, but because you care in a way that respects truth. Truth is that your energy is finite. Truth is that you cannot rescue people from lessons they must learn. Truth is that caring does not mean carrying. This is where wisdom changes the feeling of empathy. Instead of empathy being a flood, it becomes a channel. A channel directs energy. It does not spill everywhere. It has a path. You learn to ask, what is mine to hold and what is not? What is mine to hold is my intention, my actions, my words, my boundaries, my presence. What is not mine to hold is other people's choices, other people's reactions, other people's healing timeline. When you understand this, compassion becomes lighter. It becomes sustainable. You can still feel, but you don't drown. And something else happens as well. You start seeing indifference differently. You stop envying it. You stop thinking it is strength. You recognize it as a coping mechanism, often a defense against vulnerability. And instead of feeling inferior for caring, you begin to feel grateful that your heart is still alive. Because the numb world isn't winning. It is surviving. The deeply aware person has the chance to live, not by absorbing everything, but by learning wise compassion. Compassion that has boundaries, compassion that has clarity, compassion that does not turn into martyrdom. This is the kind of compassion Buddhism teaches. A compassion that remains open, but not exposed. A compassion that remains kind, but not naive. A compassion that stays human, but not helpless. And once you start practicing this, you stop being punished by your empathy. You stop apologizing for it. You stop trying to become indifferent just to fit in. You become something rarer, a person who can feel deeply, see clearly, and still remain steady. As compassion becomes steadier and no longer consumes you, a different kind of ache begins to surface. It is quieter than emotional overwhelm, but heavier in a way that is harder to explain. You start noticing that even when you are surrounded by people, something feels missing. Conversations flow, laughter happens, plans are made, yet a thin layer of emptiness lingers underneath it all. Not because you dislike people, but because you can sense the distance between what is said and what is real. There is a loneliness that does not come from being alone. It comes from seeing too clearly. When awareness deepens, social life begins to look different. You notice how much interaction is guided by performance. People smile at the right moments, nod at expected places, repeat opinions that are safe to repeat. You begin to see the unwritten script behind conversations. The need to appear confident, successful, unbothered, agreeable. It becomes obvious that many exchanges are not about connection, but about maintaining image. This realization does not make you superior, it makes you quiet. You start listening more than speaking, not because you have nothing to say, but because you can sense when words would only continue the performance. When someone asks, "How are you?" you hear the routine behind it. You know they expect "I'm good," not the complicated truth. So you give the expected answer, and the moment passes like hundreds before it. Over time, this repetition creates a subtle fatigue. Superficial relationships begin to feel like eating food that has no nourishment. It fills space, but it does not sustain. You leave gatherings feeling drained instead of energized. You scroll through messages that say nothing meaningful. You watch people bond over shared distractions rather than shared understanding. Awareness exposes how rare genuine presence is. Buddhist wisdom explains that much of social interaction is driven by attachment to identity. People protect the roles they have built, the strong one, the funny one, the successful one, the easygoing one. These roles provide stability, but they also create distance. When everyone is defending an image, very little authenticity reaches the surface. Sensitive awareness picks up on this instantly. You sense when someone is speaking from fear rather than honesty. You feel the tension when disagreement is avoided to keep peace. You notice when affection is conditional on agreement. These subtle cues accumulate until the environment feels artificial, like being in a room where the air is slightly too thin to breathe comfortably. This is the hidden loneliness of awareness. It is not that you cannot connect. It is that connection without truth feels empty. You would rather sit in silence than participate in conversations that avoid what matters. You would rather have one honest exchange than dozens of polite ones. But the world often rewards the opposite. Those who maintain social masks smoothly are seen as easy to be around. Those who challenge surface-level interaction are seen as intense. So you learn to soften your presence, to speak less about what you notice, to hide your depth so others don't feel exposed. This adaptation helps you function socially, but it also creates distance from your own authenticity. You become someone who understands everyone while feeling understood by almost no one. Another layer of loneliness comes from recognizing how much fear drives behavior. You see how people stay in unsatisfying jobs to avoid uncertainty, how they maintain relationships that no longer nourish them because they fear being alone, how they chase validation because they fear invisibility. You do not judge them for it, but you cannot pretend not to see it. And once you see fear everywhere, it becomes difficult to relax inside systems built on it. Awareness makes small talk feel exhausting because it asks you to ignore what is actually happening beneath the surface. It asks you to pretend that appearances are reality. It asks you to participate in a rhythm that your mind has outgrown. This does not mean you stop caring about people. In fact, you often care more. You see their potential, their pain, their hidden struggles. But caring without reciprocity creates another kind of solitude. You become the one who listens deeply while others skim the surface of your life. You become the one who remembers details while others forget. You become the one who senses shifts in mood while others remain unaware of yours. The imbalance quietly accumulates. Buddhist teachings describe this as the suffering that comes from craving understanding without accepting that not everyone can offer it. Each person operates at a level shaped by their experiences, fears, and readiness. Expecting depth from someone who has not cultivated it will only create frustration. Acceptance softens the loneliness, but it does not erase it. There is also the realization that awareness changes your tolerance for dishonesty, even the subtle kind. You notice when people exaggerate to impress, when they hide intentions behind friendliness, when they say what sounds good instead of what is true. These behaviors become difficult to overlook because they disrupt the sense of trust you need to feel safe. Trust becomes selective. You start choosing environments carefully. Places filled with noise and competition feel draining, while quiet spaces feel restorative. You seek conversations that allow pauses, that allow uncertainty, that allow vulnerability without judgment. You value presence over excitement, yet this preference can reduce the number of people you feel comfortable around. Many sensitive individuals eventually discover that loneliness is not only about lacking people, it is about lacking resonance. Being around others who do not see the world in a similar way can feel like speaking a language no one else understands. However, Buddhist wisdom reframes this experience. It suggests that loneliness is not proof that something is wrong with you, but an invitation to deepen your relationship with yourself. When external connection feels limited, internal connection becomes essential. Learning to sit with your own mind without needing constant distraction becomes a form of companionship. You begin to appreciate solitude not as absence, but as space. Space to reflect, to feel, to exist without performance. This shift transforms loneliness into aloneness, which carries a different emotional tone. Aloneness is not empty, it is peaceful. From this place, your interactions with others change. You no longer seek connection out of fear of isolation. You seek it out of genuine interest. You become more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. You understand that energy is precious, and you want to invest it where authenticity is possible. Interestingly, this selectivity often leads to deeper relationships, even if they are fewer. When you meet someone who also values honesty, presence, and depth, the connection feels effortless. There is less need to explain yourself, less need to hide, less need to translate your thoughts into something socially acceptable. Moments like this remind you that true connection still exists. The loneliness of seeing through social masks also teaches compassion. Instead of resenting people for their superficiality, you begin to understand that masks serve a purpose. They protect wounds that are not ready to be seen. They allow people to function while carrying unresolved pain. Recognizing this softens your frustration. You stop trying to force authenticity from those who are not ready for it. At the same time, you learn to reveal yourself gradually. You do not need to expose your depth to everyone. Not everyone has earned access to it. Sharing selectively becomes a form of emotional safety, not secrecy. This balance between openness and discernment is another aspect of wisdom. As awareness matures, the loneliness transforms into a quiet independence. You no longer measure your worth by how many people understand you. You no longer chase belonging at the cost of authenticity. You realize that being true to yourself will naturally attract those who resonate and gently distance those who do not. You stop trying to be universally accepted. Instead, you focus on being internally aligned. When your actions match your values, a different kind of peace emerges. You may still experience moments of loneliness, but they no longer feel like rejection. They feel like the natural result of choosing depth over convenience. And something surprising begins to happen. You become a safe presence for others who are also tired of pretending. People start opening up around you without knowing why. They sense the absence of judgment, the steadiness in your attention, the sincerity in your responses. Your awareness becomes a quiet invitation for authenticity. The loneliness you once felt begins to transform into purpose. You realize that your sensitivity allows you to create spaces where masks are not required. Even brief interactions can feel meaningful because they are grounded in presence rather than performance. You become someone who listens fully, speaks honestly, and respects silence. In this way, awareness does not isolate you forever. It reshapes how you connect. You learn that depth does not eliminate loneliness entirely, but it makes connection more meaningful when it happens. You learn that authenticity attracts authenticity, even if slowly. You learn that it is better to have a few relationships built on truth than many built on pretense. And most importantly, you learn that your ability to see through masks is not a curse. It is guidance. It steers you toward environments, people, and experiences that align with who you truly are. It protects you from getting lost in illusions. It keeps you from investing your life in things that cannot fulfill you. The hidden loneliness becomes a sign that you are moving closer to real connection, not farther from it. As the social masks become easier to see through, a new truth becomes impossible to avoid. Depth does not only change who you connect with, it changes what your body can tolerate. Because the real battle is not only in your mind anymore, it's in your nervous system. The same awareness that helps you spot what is false also makes your body react faster to what is real. And that is where many deeply aware people quietly struggle. Not because they lack strength, but because they feel everything before they have learned how to hold it. There is a reason some sensitive people seem calm on the outside, but feel like they're constantly bracing on the inside. Their nervous system is always scanning, always reading the room, always detecting subtle shifts in tone, energy, intention. They don't choose to do it. It happens automatically. And when that sensitivity isn't trained, it becomes overwhelm. When it is trained, it becomes resilient compassion. This is where the idea of the Bodhisattva becomes more than a spiritual word. It becomes a blueprint for survival. A Bodhisattva is someone who chooses to stay awake in a world that is often asleep and still keep their heart open. Not because they are naive, but because they are disciplined. Not because they never feel pain, but because they have learned how to carry feeling without breaking. Sensitive people don't need to become less sensitive. They need to become more stable. A very short truth sits at the center of this lesson. The nervous system does not respond to logic. It responds to safety. You can tell yourself 100 times that you're fine, that nothing is wrong, that you should relax. But if your body does not feel safe, your body will not relax. It will tighten, it will rush, it will prepare for danger, even if danger is only emotional. This is why sensitivity becomes exhausting. It's not only emotional, it's biological. When you walk into a tense environment, your body reacts before your mind explains it. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tighten. Your stomach shifts. Your mind speeds up. You may not even realize it's happening until later, when you feel drained for no obvious reason. This is your nervous system doing its job. It is trying to protect you by detecting risk early. The problem is that in many sensitive people, the nervous system learned to treat normal life as a threat. Maybe you grew up in an environment where emotions were unpredictable. Maybe love came with conditions. Maybe peace could break at any moment. Maybe you had to read moods to stay safe. If that happened, your sensitivity is not just a personality trait. It is a survival skill that never got turned off. So now, even in adulthood, your body keeps scanning. Even when nothing is happening, you stay alert. You can relax, but not fully. You can rest, but your mind stays half awake. You can enjoy, but a part of you stays ready for something to go wrong. This is what it means to feel everything without training. It becomes internal overwork. Buddhist practice does not begin by telling you to be calm. It begins by teaching you to see what is happening without fighting it. Because the fight itself becomes tension. If you are sensitive and you shame yourself for it, your nervous system becomes even more stressed. It reads your own mind as an enemy. The first step is not control, it is friendship. You start by treating your sensitivity like a living thing inside you that is trying to help. You stop insulting it. You stop calling it weakness. You stop treating your emotional response as proof that something is wrong with you. Instead, you begin to ask a better question. What is my body trying to protect me from right now? This simple shift changes everything, because when you become curious instead of harsh, your nervous system starts to soften. It feels seen. And what is seen with kindness often stops screaming. A bodhisattva is not someone who has no nervous system reaction. A bodhisattva is someone who knows how to return to center after being moved. That returning is a skill, and like any skill, it is trained through repetition. One of the most important ideas in Buddhism is that the mind and body can be trained, not through force, but through steady practice. Sensitivity becomes resilient compassion when you learn to regulate your inner state, the same way a strong man learns to control his breath under heavy weight. Breath is not just air. Breath is the steering wheel of the nervous system. When you breathe short and fast, your body thinks something is wrong. When you breathe slow and steady, your body receives a message of safety. This is why breath is central in meditation, not because it is mystical, but because it is direct. A simple practice begins here, not complicated, just real. When you feel overwhelmed, don't immediately analyze it. Don't mentally fight it. Don't start building stories. Instead, soften your jaw, drop your shoulders, exhale longer than you inhale. Even a few breaths like this signals to your body that the moment is not an emergency. This does not remove your sensitivity. It gives it a container. Without a container, sensitivity spills everywhere. You can think of it like water. Water is not weak. Water shapes stone, but without a vessel, it floods. With a vessel, it nourishes. The vessel is your nervous system regulation. Another part of training is learning to recognize your early signals. Most people wait until they are already overwhelmed, then they try to fix it. But the body gives warnings early, a slight tightening in the chest, a restless urge to check your phone, a subtle irritability, a feeling of buzzing in the mind. These are signals that your system is starting to rise into stress. Sensitive people are often so used to this rising that they treat it as normal. They live in mild stress as a baseline, but resilience begins when you catch it early. You learn to pause when the first signals appear. You learn to step away before you snap. You learn to drink water before you crash. You learn to slow down before your mind speeds into panic. This is not weakness, this is mastery. The Bodhisattva path is sometimes described as compassion for all beings, but the first being your compassion must include is you. Because if you treat yourself like a machine, you will eventually break. Many deeply aware people break because they believe being strong means ignoring their own limits. They keep listening to everyone's problems, they keep showing up, they keep absorbing, they keep carrying, and they call it kindness. But kindness without self-awareness becomes self-harm. True compassion includes discernment about capacity. A trained nervous system knows when to open and when to close, not as a cold shutdown, but as a wise boundary, like a door that can be opened gently and closed gently. If you leave the door open all day in a storm, the house is ruined. If you lock the door forever, the house becomes a prison. The skill is learning the right timing. This is what it means to feel everything without breaking. It is not constant openness, it is flexible openness. Flexibility is strength. Another key training is learning to separate perception from absorption. Sensitive people often confuse "I can sense this" with "I must take this in." You can sense someone's sadness without taking it into your body. You can notice tension without making it your burden. You can see suffering without letting it own your nervous system. This is a practice of inner distance, not emotional coldness. In Buddhism, this is related to mindful observation. You notice what is present. You don't pretend it isn't there, but you also don't merge with it. You witness it like a mountain witnessing weather. Storms come, storms go, the mountain remains. This does not happen by willpower. It happens by training attention. Attention is a muscle. Where you place it determines what grows. If your attention constantly locks onto what hurts, your nervous system becomes trained for distress. Not because you are weak, but because you are repeating a pattern. So training includes learning to place attention intentionally. This is where many people misunderstand compassion. They think compassion means staring at pain endlessly. But compassion is not obsession. Compassion is care paired with skill. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to return to the present moment and stabilize yourself before responding. Because when you respond from dysregulation, you often create more harm. You may say things you don't mean, you may overpromise, you may rescue in ways that weaken the other person, you may react instead of help. Steady compassion is safer than emotional urgency. This is why Buddhist compassion is often calm. Not because it doesn't feel, but because it is held by wisdom. Wisdom says, "I see your suffering, and I will not abandon you, but I will not abandon myself either." Another part of nervous system training is learning to complete stress in the body. This is something many sensitive people never learned. They hold stress inside like unfinished business. A tense moment happens, and the body prepares for threat. But then the moment ends, and the body does not release. So the stress stays in the shoulders, in the neck, in the stomach, in the breath. Over time, this becomes chronic tension. You might feel tired even when you haven't done much. You might feel restless even when everything is fine. Your body is holding old alarms. To train resilience, you must teach your body how to release. Sometimes release is simple. Shake out your hands, stretch slowly, walk outside. Let your eyes look far into distance. Unclench your jaw. These small acts tell the nervous system, the moment has passed. You don't always need deep analysis. Sometimes you need completion. Sensitive people often live in their head because their perception is strong, but the nervous system is in the body. So the training must return you to the body. A bodhisattva is not someone who escapes the body. A bodhisattva lives inside the body with awareness. Another important training is learning to rest without guilt. Many sensitive people feel guilty when they rest. They feel like they should be doing more, helping more, fixing more, caring more. They believe their awareness creates a duty to always act. But constant action from a stressed nervous system becomes frantic, not helpful. Rest is not selfish. Rest is preparation. If you are deeply aware, you need periods of quiet to recover your sensitivity. Otherwise, sensitivity turns into irritability, compassion turns into resentment, wisdom turns into fatigue. This is where you begin to treat your energy like something sacred, not as a dramatic idea, but as a practical truth. If your energy is low, your kindness becomes thin. If your mind is overwhelmed, your presence becomes unstable. If your body is exhausted, your perception becomes distorted. So training includes protecting your inputs. This means being mindful of what you consume, not only food, but media, people, environments. If you feed your nervous system constant drama, constant noise, constant negativity, it will stay activated. And then you will blame yourself for feeling overwhelmed, when the real issue is that you've been living in emotional pollution. Awareness requires clean space. This is not about becoming fragile, it is about becoming precise. A resilient nervous system can handle difficulty, but it also respects unnecessary strain. There is a difference between necessary hardship and pointless exposure. One of the most powerful shifts is learning to say, I will not expose myself to what my nervous system cannot digest. This is not weakness, this is wisdom. A bodhisattva does not run toward every fire without training. They become trained first. Then they can enter the fire without burning. This training also includes learning how to be with suffering without internalizing blame. Sensitive people often feel responsible for how others feel. They think if someone is upset, they must have done something wrong. If someone is distant, they must have failed. If someone is unhappy, they must fix it. This mindset is not empathy, it is emotional over-responsibility. It creates suffering because it puts you in control of things you cannot control. The Bodhisattva path teaches compassion without ownership. You care, you support, you offer, but you do not cling to being the cause of other people's emotional states. This is where compassion becomes free. When compassion is free, it flows naturally without draining you. It becomes a way of being, not a burden. But to get there, you must train your nervous system to tolerate discomfort without collapsing. This does not mean forcing yourself into stressful situations to toughen up. That often backfires. It means gradual strengthening, small exposures, small practices, small returns to safety. Resilience is built like muscle. Too much weight too soon causes injury. So you practice in daily life. You practice staying present in a difficult conversation without losing your breath. You practice pausing before reacting. You practice feeling sadness without panicking. You practice witnessing tension without rushing to fix it. You practice letting discomfort move through you like weather rather than treating it as a permanent state. Over time, your nervous system learns a new truth. Feeling is not fatal. This is a huge shift for sensitive people because many of them learned early that feeling deeply was dangerous. It led to punishment, rejection, shame, or chaos. So their body learned to fear emotion. Training teaches the opposite. Emotion is information. Emotion is energy. Emotion is movement. It rises, it falls, and you can survive it. When you learn this, your sensitivity becomes stable. It becomes something you can trust. Then compassion becomes something you can offer without fear. Another Buddhist practice that supports this is loving kindness, not forced positivity, not pretending everything is okay. Loving kindness is a steady intention of goodwill. It trains the heart to stay warm without becoming flooded. You can silently offer goodwill to yourself and others without needing to fix them. This shifts your nervous system from urgency into care. It creates a new baseline. When your baseline becomes care instead of fear, your sensitivity stops feeling like constant threat detection. You still perceive, but you don't collapse. This is the nervous system of the Bodhisattva, not a perfect nervous system, not a numb one, a trained one. A nervous system that can feel the world and remain grounded. A nervous system that can sense suffering and still breathe. A nervous system that can love without losing itself. As this training deepens, you start noticing a new kind of strength inside you. The world does not become less intense. People do not become less complicated. Pain does not disappear, but you stop breaking every time you touch it. You learn to carry your awareness like a flame protected by a lantern. The light remains. The wind no longer destroys it. As your nervous system becomes steadier and you learn how to feel without collapsing, a deeper question begins to surface. Where did this sensitivity come from in the first place? Why did your awareness sharpen so intensely while others seem able to move through life untouched? For many deeply aware people, the answer is not peaceful growth. It is pain, not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that quietly reshapes how you see everything. There is a strange truth that few people talk about openly. Some people wake up not because they searched for wisdom, but because they had no choice. Something happened that forced their mind to grow eyes in the dark. Trauma does not always destroy perception. Sometimes it burns away the illusions that once made life feel safe. Pain can become a teacher that does not ask permission. Trauma changes the way the brain scans the world. When something overwhelming happens, the mind learns to detect danger earlier next time. It becomes alert to tone shifts, facial expressions, pauses in speech, sudden changes in energy. This hyper-awareness is not imagination, it is adaptation. The brain is trying to prevent future harm by noticing patterns before they fully appear. What begins as protection slowly becomes perception. You might find yourself reading people quickly, sensing tension others miss, anticipating conflict before it starts. You notice contradictions between words and behavior. You feel uneasy around certain individuals without being able to explain why. Later, something reveals that your intuition was correct. This is not coincidence, it is the nervous system remembering. However, the same mechanism that protects can also exhaust. When your mind is trained by trauma, it does not easily switch off. Even safe situations can feel uncertain because your brain learned that danger can arrive without warning. You become someone who checks exits, who listens for changes in voice tone, who reads silence as information. This constant monitoring can feel like living with an internal alarm system that never fully powers down. From a Buddhist perspective, suffering often cracks the illusion of control. Before trauma, life may have felt predictable. After trauma, the fragility of existence becomes undeniable. You realize that stability can disappear overnight. You understand impermanence not as philosophy, but as lived experience. This realization can create depth earlier than expected. You begin to ask questions others avoid. Why do people hurt each other? What truly matters if everything can change so quickly? What is real security? What does healing actually mean? These questions shift your priorities. Surface-level concerns lose importance because you have seen what lies underneath. Trauma can strip away denial. It forces awareness of emotional realities that many people keep buried. You may become sensitive to injustice because you know what powerlessness feels like. You may become compassionate toward pain because you recognize its weight. You may value honesty because deception once cost you dearly. In this way, suffering sharpens perception instead of destroying it. But this sharpening comes with complexity. Awareness born from trauma can carry fear inside it. You may struggle to trust your calm because calm once preceded chaos. You may struggle to relax because relaxation once made you vulnerable. You may struggle to accept kindness because kindness once disappeared unexpectedly. Healing requires retraining the mind to see possibility again. Buddhist teachings emphasize that awareness without healing can become suffering. Seeing clearly is valuable, but carrying unresolved pain distorts perception. You might interpret neutral situations as threats. You might expect abandonment even when none is coming. You might withdraw from connection because closeness feels dangerous. The goal is not to erase sensitivity, but to remove the fear attached to it. This involves understanding that trauma taught you survival, not weakness. Your awareness is evidence that you adapted. Instead of blaming yourself for being different, you begin to recognize the intelligence behind your responses. Your body did what it had to do. Acknowledging this reduces internal conflict. Another shift happens when you stop viewing trauma only as damage and start seeing it as information. It revealed where safety was lacking. It showed you what you needed but did not receive. It highlighted values that matter to you now: honesty, stability, kindness, presence. This knowledge can guide your future choices. You become intentional about the environments you enter and the people you allow close. Trauma often creates a deep sensitivity to authenticity. You can sense when someone is genuine versus when they are performing. This can make you selective, but it also protects you from repeating harmful patterns. Your awareness becomes a filter that prioritizes emotional safety. However, this selectivity can also feel isolating. You may struggle to relate to people who have not experienced similar depths of pain. Conversations about trivial matters may feel disconnected from your reality. You might crave discussions about meaning, healing, growth, and truth. When those conversations are rare, loneliness intensifies. This is where compassion for yourself becomes essential. Your path was shaped by circumstances you did not choose. Comparing yourself to those who had smoother journeys only creates unnecessary suffering. Instead, you begin to honor your resilience, not as pride, but as recognition that you are still here, still capable of feeling, still capable of caring. Many people become numb after trauma. The fact that you remain sensitive is significant. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering can lead to awakening when it is met with understanding rather than resistance. When you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this experience teaching me?" you transform pain into insight. This does not romanticize trauma. It acknowledges its impact while refusing to let it define your entire story. Another aspect of trauma-born awareness is the ability to sit with discomfort. You have already faced intense emotional states, so smaller stresses may feel manageable by comparison. This can create strength in crisis situations. Others may panic while you remain calm because you recognize that intense feelings do not last forever. Your tolerance for emotional depth becomes an asset. At the same time, it is important to balance this strength with gentleness. Just because you can endure pain does not mean you should continue exposing yourself to it unnecessarily. Endurance without care leads to burnout. Learning to choose peace becomes an act of wisdom. Trauma also heightens sensitivity to loss. You may feel grief more strongly because you know how quickly things can change. This awareness can make you cherish moments more deeply. Simple experiences like quiet evenings, genuine conversations, or time in nature may feel profoundly meaningful because you understand their fragility. Impermanence becomes motivation to live consciously. You may find yourself valuing presence over productivity, authenticity over approval, connection over status. Your priorities shift toward what nourishes the heart rather than what impresses others. This realignment often surprises people who expected you to follow conventional paths. Awareness reshapes ambition. Instead of chasing external validation, you begin seeking internal alignment. Success becomes less about recognition and more about peace. You want a life that feels honest rather than impressive. This perspective often emerges from having seen how hollow external achievements can feel when emotional wounds remain unaddressed. Trauma can expose the limits of material solutions to emotional pain. This insight can lead you toward practices that cultivate inner stability. Meditation, mindfulness, journaling, therapy, spiritual study. These tools become meaningful because they address the root of suffering rather than its symptoms. You become someone who values understanding over avoidance. Your awareness becomes directed rather than reactive. Another gift hidden within trauma is empathy for complexity. You understand that people are shaped by experiences you cannot see. This reduces judgment. Instead of labeling someone as simply difficult or cold, you may wonder what hurt taught them to be that way. This perspective fosters compassion without excusing harmful behavior. You can hold nuance without losing clarity. Trauma-informed awareness also sharpens intuition. Your body signals when something feels wrong, even if your mind cannot explain it immediately. Learning to trust these signals helps you avoid situations that may repeat past harm. This trust grows through practice and self-respect. Listening to your inner responses becomes a form of protection. Over time, you begin to see your story as a source of guidance rather than shame. The experiences that once felt like evidence of weakness become proof of survival. Your perception becomes less about fear and more about understanding. You stop wishing to be someone else. Instead, you start integrating your past into your present with compassion. You acknowledge that your awareness has roots in pain, but it does not have to remain trapped there. It can evolve into wisdom that benefits both you and others. This transformation does not erase scars, it gives them meaning. As healing continues, you may discover a desire to help others who struggle with similar experiences, not by rescuing them, but by offering presence and understanding. Your sensitivity allows you to create spaces where others feel seen without judgment. In this way, your awareness becomes service. Pain becomes purpose. Buddhist teachings often describe suffering as a doorway to compassion. When you have walked through darkness, you recognize it in others. Your response becomes gentler because you know how heavy, unseen battles can be. Your perception becomes a bridge instead of a barrier. Eventually, you realize that trauma awakens something in you that comfort never could. It revealed strength you did not know you had. It taught you the value of awareness. It forced you to develop resilience. And although you would never wish the pain on anyone, you cannot deny the depth it created. You become someone who understands both fragility and endurance. This understanding allows you to live with a quiet intensity. You feel deeply, but you are not consumed. You notice suffering, but you are not defined by it. You carry your story without letting it control your future. Awareness becomes a conscious choice rather than an automatic defense. As your past stops defining you and your awareness becomes something you carry with steadiness, another quiet shift begins to unfold. It doesn't arrive as pain or crisis. It arrives as loss of interest. Things that once absorbed your attention start to feel strangely empty. You try to enjoy them the way you used to, but the spark isn't there. The noise, the scrolling, the endless stream of distractions that once filled your time now feel like echoes of something you've already outgrown. There is a discomfort in realizing you can no longer escape yourself. At first, you may assume something is wrong. You might think you're becoming dull, disconnected, or difficult to please. Friends still enjoy the same shows, the same gossip, the same conversations, the same routines. But you sit there feeling detached, like you're watching from a distance. You participate out of habit, yet inside there is a quiet voice asking why it all feels so hollow. This is not boredom in the usual sense. It is awareness refusing to be numbed again. When consciousness deepens, distraction loses its power. Distraction works by pulling your attention away from what you feel. But when you've spent time facing your inner world honestly, your mind no longer finds relief in avoidance. You become sensitive to artificial stimulation. Loud entertainment feels exhausting instead of exciting. Endless information feels overwhelming instead of engaging. Your mind begins craving depth instead of noise. This shift can feel like a curse because society is built around distraction. Entire industries exist to capture attention, to keep people scrolling, clicking, watching, reacting. When you stop responding to those hooks, you may feel like you don't fit into the rhythm everyone else follows. Conversations about trends and viral moments may seem trivial. You might struggle to pretend enthusiasm for things that once entertained you. Awareness changes what your nervous system finds rewarding. Dopamine-driven activities lose their appeal because you recognize their temporary nature. You see how quickly excitement fades and leaves emptiness behind. You notice the cycle of anticipation, consumption, and letdown repeating endlessly. Instead of chasing the next hit of stimulation, you begin searching for experiences that feel grounding and meaningful. This search can initially feel confusing. Without constant distraction, silence becomes louder. Thoughts become clearer. Emotions surface more easily. You start noticing the restlessness that distraction once concealed. Many people fear this stage because it exposes unresolved feelings. But it also creates an opportunity to understand yourself more deeply. Buddhist teachings describe this as seeing through the illusion of constant satisfaction. Pleasure is not condemned, but attachment to pleasure is recognized as a source of suffering. When you expect external stimulation to provide lasting fulfillment, disappointment is inevitable. Awareness reveals this pattern and gently pulls you away from it. You begin to recognize that entertainment was never the problem, dependence on it was. This realization invites you to rediscover simpler forms of engagement. Activities that once seemed too quiet or slow begin to feel restorative. Walking without headphones, reading without multitasking, sitting with a cup of tea without reaching for your phone. These moments allow your mind to settle rather than scatter. Stillness stops feeling empty and starts feeling spacious. At the same time, you may struggle with guilt. Productivity culture equates constant activity with value, so choosing slower experiences can feel like falling behind. You may worry that you are wasting time or missing out. But deeper awareness shifts your understanding of time itself. You begin valuing presence over accumulation. You realize that a day filled with calm attention can be richer than a day filled with frantic stimulation. Another challenge emerges when relationships are built around shared distractions. If conversations revolved around entertainment, gossip, or consumption, you may find less common ground. This can create distance, not because you reject people, but because your interests have changed. You start seeking discussions that explore ideas, emotions, and experiences rather than surface-level updates. Connection becomes less about activity and more about authenticity. This transition can feel isolating, especially if those around you are not experiencing the same shift. You may question whether you are becoming antisocial or overly serious. In reality, you are simply aligning your external life with your internal state. Awareness filters what you allow into your mind. You become selective about what you watch, read, and listen to because you understand that content shapes perception. Violent or chaotic media may leave you unsettled. Excessive negativity may drain your energy. Instead, you gravitate toward material that expands understanding or fosters calm. Your consumption becomes intentional rather than automatic. This intentionality also reveals how much time was previously spent avoiding discomfort. Without constant input, you face emotions that were postponed. sadness, uncertainty, longing, unresolved questions. They come forward asking to be acknowledged. This can feel heavy, but it is also healing. Emotions processed consciously lose their power to control behavior unconsciously. You stop running from your own mind. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes that suffering often comes from resisting what is present. When distraction is no longer available, you practice acceptance instead of escape. You learn to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to change it. Over time, discomfort loses its intensity because it is no longer fought. Acceptance becomes a form of freedom. Another effect of deepened consciousness is increased sensitivity to overstimulation. Crowded places, constant notifications, and multitasking environments may feel overwhelming. Your nervous system seeks balance, preferring environments that allow focus and calm. This preference is not weakness, it is adaptation. You start designing your life around what sustains you rather than what impresses others. Work habits may change as well. Tasks that require shallow engagement may feel draining, while projects that involve creativity or purpose feel energizing. You realize that motivation increases when actions align with meaning. This insight can lead to career shifts or new hobbies that reflect your values. Purpose replaces mere activity. With time, the curse begins to reveal itself as guidance. Losing interest in distraction pushes you toward experiences that nourish your mind and heart. You may discover fulfillment in learning, creating, helping others, or exploring nature. These activities provide satisfaction that does not rely on constant novelty. Joy becomes quieter but more stable. You also begin noticing subtle beauty that distraction once obscured. The rhythm of your breath, the changing colors of the sky, the sound of leaves moving in the wind. These moments do not demand attention, they invite it. Awareness allows you to receive them fully. Life becomes less about excitement and more about presence. This shift can transform your relationship with solitude. Instead of fearing time alone, you appreciate it as an opportunity to recharge. Solitude becomes a place where your thoughts can unfold without interruption. Creativity often emerges here because your mind is not scattered across multiple stimuli. Your inner world becomes a source of companionship. At the same time, you learn to re-engage with the external world in a balanced way. Awareness does not require rejecting entertainment entirely. It encourages conscious enjoyment rather than unconscious consumption. You can still watch a film, listen to music, or laugh with friends, but you do so without relying on it to fill emotional gaps. You participate without losing yourself. This balanced approach prevents the pendulum swing from overstimulation to withdrawal. Instead of isolating completely, you integrate awareness into everyday life. You choose environments and activities that respect your sensitivity while keeping you connected to the world. Integration replaces escape. Over time, the feeling of loss fades, replaced by clarity. You understand that your mind simply matured beyond constant distraction. Just as a child outgrows certain toys, consciousness outgrows certain forms of entertainment. This does not diminish their value for others, it reflects your own evolution. You stop judging yourself for changing. Buddhist teachings remind us that growth often involves letting go of attachments that once felt essential. Distraction is one of those attachments. Releasing it opens space for deeper experiences, even if the transition feels uncomfortable. You begin trusting the process. Eventually, the curse transforms into a gift. Your attention becomes available for what truly matters. Relationships deepen because you listen fully. Work improves because you focus without fragmentation. Creativity expands because your mind is not overloaded. Peace increases because you are not constantly pulled in different directions. Freedom from distraction becomes freedom to live deliberately. You discover that awareness is not meant to isolate you from life, but to immerse you in it more authentically. Instead of skimming the surface of experiences, you engage with them completely. Even ordinary moments feel significant because you are present for them. Presence replaces stimulation as your source of fulfillment. As presence becomes your new center and distraction no longer pulls you away from yourself, another ability quietly sharpens. You begin noticing things that are never spoken. A shift in tone, a pause that lasts a fraction too long, a smile that does not reach the eyes. Conversations start revealing layers beneath the surface, and you realize that words are only a small part of communication. Something deeper is always moving underneath, and once you become aware of it, you cannot stop sensing it. There is a subtle tension that lives between what people say and what they actually feel. Sensitive awareness picks up on that tension the way a finely tuned instrument detects vibration. It is not mystical, it is attentiveness. When your mind is not flooded with noise, it has space to observe. You notice the way someone's posture changes when a certain topic appears. You hear the strain behind casual laughter. You feel the heaviness in silence when unresolved emotions are present. Many people move past these signals without noticing because their attention is focused on content rather than energy. They listen to the story, not the state of the person telling it. But sensitive people register both at the same time. They track the emotional atmosphere as carefully as the words. This can feel like carrying a second layer of perception that others do not acknowledge. Sometimes it creates confusion. You may sense discomfort while everyone else acts relaxed. You may feel tension in a room that others describe as calm. When you express what you notice, people might dismiss it because it has not yet surfaced openly. This can lead you to question your perception, even though later events often confirm what you felt. Your body processes information faster than social awareness allows. Buddhist mindfulness trains attention to include subtle sensations, not just obvious ones. This practice strengthens sensitivity to the present moment. Over time, you become aware of micro-expressions, fleeting emotional signals that reveal true feelings before the mind has time to hide them. A tightening around the eyes, a shift in breathing, a slight withdrawal of energy. These details communicate volumes. Your awareness becomes attuned to authenticity. This attunement can make dishonesty uncomfortable to be around. When someone says one thing but feels another, the mismatch creates tension that sensitive people absorb immediately. It is not that you are searching for flaws, it is that your perception cannot ignore inconsistency. This sensitivity often develops because of earlier experiences that required careful observation for safety. Learning to read moods became necessary, and the skill remained even when circumstances changed. What began as protection evolved into perception. However, refined awareness also has compassionate roots. When you genuinely care about others, you pay attention. You notice when someone's energy shifts because you want to understand them, not because you want to judge them. This intention makes your perception gentle rather than intrusive. Sensitive people often become quiet observers because observation feels safer than constant participation. From that position, you witness interactions unfolding with clarity. You see who dominates conversations, who withdraws, who tries to keep peace, who masks insecurity with humor. These patterns reveal emotional dynamics that shape relationships. Understanding these dynamics can deepen empathy. Instead of reacting to surface behavior, you consider what might be driving it. Anger may signal fear. Withdrawal may signal overwhelm. Excessive cheerfulness may signal loneliness. This perspective prevents you from taking things personally and allows you to respond with patience. At the same time, it can be exhausting. Constantly processing emotional undercurrents requires energy. If you do not learn how to filter what you absorb, you may leave social situations feeling drained. Your mind continues replaying interactions, analyzing tone and intention, trying to make sense of what was unsaid. This mental activity is not overthinking in the usual sense. It is unregulated empathy, Buddhist teachings emphasize balance between compassion and equanimity. You can care without carrying everything. Recognizing that not all emotional signals require action helps conserve energy. Sometimes awareness is simply awareness, not a call to intervene. Learning to step back prevents sensitivity from turning into burden. Another challenge arises when you perceive emotions others have not acknowledged themselves. You may sense sadness in someone who insists they are fine. You may notice resentment hidden behind politeness. Bringing attention to these feelings prematurely can create resistance because people protect themselves from vulnerability. Timing becomes crucial. Sensitive awareness is most helpful when paired with patience. Instead of forcing insight, you allow people to reveal themselves at their own pace. You remain available without pushing. This approach builds trust and prevents misunderstanding. Trust is essential because your perception can feel invasive if handled carelessly. When people feel seen without judgment, they often relax and open up. Your presence becomes a safe space rather than a mirror they want to avoid. This is how sensitivity evolves into supportive connection rather than silent observation. Listening plays a major role in this process. Deep listening means paying attention not only to words, but to pauses, tone, and emotional context. It involves resisting the urge to interrupt or prepare responses. You let the other person's experience unfold fully before engaging. This creates conversations that feel meaningful rather than transactional. Meaningful dialogue nourishes both people involved. You also learn to express your perceptions carefully. Instead of stating conclusions, you offer gentle observations. Phrases like, "I sense something is bothering you," invite dialogue without accusation. This approach respects the other person's autonomy while acknowledging what you feel. Communication becomes an art of sensitivity. Over time, you begin recognizing patterns in your own reactions as well. Emotional undercurrents affect you because they resonate with your experiences. Awareness of this connection helps you distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Self-awareness stabilizes external perception. When you understand your triggers, you are less likely to misinterpret signals. You can respond calmly instead of defensively. This stability enhances your ability to support others without losing balance. Sensitive awareness also reveals positive undercurrents that others overlook. You notice quiet kindness, subtle gratitude, unspoken admiration. These gentle emotions often go unnoticed because they are not dramatic. Recognizing them allows you to appreciate the depth of human connection. Your perception becomes a source of gratitude rather than only concern. In nature, this sensitivity extends to environmental awareness. You feel shifts in atmosphere, changes in weather, the rhythm of natural sounds. These experiences ground you and restore energy depleted by social interaction. Nature communicates without words, offering clarity without complexity. Time spent in quiet environments recalibrates your perception. As you continue developing this awareness, discernment becomes important. Not every emotional signal requires your involvement. You learn to choose when to engage and when to observe from a distance. This choice preserves your energy for situations where your presence truly matters. Discernment protects your sensitivity from burnout. Another aspect of refined awareness is recognizing when someone's emotional state influences the entire group. One anxious person can raise collective tension. One calm person can stabilize it. By managing your own state, you contribute to the atmosphere around you. Your inner balance becomes a quiet form of leadership. Buddhist mindfulness teaches that awareness begins within. When you are grounded, external signals do not overwhelm you. Instead, they inform your responses. You act from clarity rather than impulse. Clarity transforms perception into wisdom. Sensitive people often worry that their awareness isolates them. Yet it can also connect them deeply with those who value authenticity. When you meet someone who appreciates emotional honesty, communication flows naturally. There is less need to decode signals because both of you speak from the same depth. Shared awareness creates genuine intimacy. You start recognizing that your ability to detect undercurrents is not a flaw, but a skill that requires care. Like any skill, it improves with practice and boundaries. It allows you to navigate complex situations with insight while maintaining compassion. Insight replaces confusion. As you become more comfortable with this ability, you stop doubting your perceptions. Confidence grows not from certainty about others, but from trust in your own experience. You know that what you sense has value, even if it is not immediately validated. Self-trust stabilizes your interactions. Eventually, refined awareness changes how you move through the world. You approach conversations with curiosity instead of assumption. You respect silence as much as speech. You value authenticity over performance. These choices shape relationships that feel honest and sustainable. Your presence becomes both perceptive and calming. As your awareness of emotional undercurrents becomes clearer, you begin to notice something heavier than personal tension. You start seeing the wider patterns, the unfairness that repeats, the quiet suffering that goes unnoticed, the small cruelties people excuse as normal. It stops being possible to look away without feeling a pull inside your chest. You may wish you could ignore it like others seem to do, but something in you refuses. Not because you want to carry the weight, but because once you see, pretending blindness feels like betrayal. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from physical effort. It comes from caring in a world that often moves forward without pausing to ask who gets hurt along the way. Constant moral awareness means your mind does not filter out injustice as background noise. It registers each instance as meaningful, each sign of suffering as something that matters. While others scroll past painful news or laugh at harsh jokes, you feel a quiet discomfort that lingers long after the moment passes. This awareness can make everyday life feel heavier than it appears on the surface. Sensitive perception extends beyond personal relationships into the social fabric itself. You notice when people are dismissed, when voices are ignored, when kindness is treated as weakness. You see how systems reward competition while neglecting compassion. These realizations accumulate until it feels like you are carrying a map of wounds that others refuse to acknowledge. Buddhist teachings describe this as the awakening of conscience. It is not meant to create despair, but it often does before wisdom matures. When awareness grows faster than understanding, the suffering of the world can feel overwhelming. You may ask why pain exists at all, why cruelty persists, why indifference spreads so easily. Questions without immediate answers can create restlessness. Living with moral awareness also means feeling tension between what is and what should be. You see potential for kindness that remains unused. You recognize opportunities for fairness that are ignored. This gap between reality and possibility becomes a source of frustration. It can feel like watching a preventable tragedy unfold in slow motion. Over time, frustration can turn into fatigue. Your nervous system was not designed to process constant exposure to suffering without relief. News cycles, social media, and daily interactions amplify negative events because they capture attention. If you absorb all of it, your mind becomes saturated. The result is emotional exhaustion that resembles burnout, even if your life appears stable from the outside. Learning to manage exposure becomes essential. Buddhist wisdom encourages compassion paired with discernment. Compassion without boundaries leads to depletion. Discernment asks where your energy can make a meaningful difference and where it would simply dissolve into overwhelm. This distinction allows you to remain engaged without losing balance. You begin to understand that caring does not require constant consumption of distress. Another aspect of moral awareness is the feeling of responsibility. You may believe that noticing suffering obligates you to act. When action is not possible, guilt can arise. You wonder if doing nothing makes you complicit. This internal conflict intensifies exhaustion because it creates pressure without resolution. Wisdom reframes responsibility as intention rather than control. You cannot fix every injustice, but you can choose how you respond in your immediate sphere. Small acts of kindness, fairness, and honesty become ways of aligning with your values. Instead of trying to change everything at once, you focus on what is within reach. Alignment restores a sense of agency. Moral awareness also challenges your perception of success. Achievements that ignore ethical consequences lose their appeal. You may question career paths, consumer habits, or social norms that prioritize profit over well-being. This questioning can create tension with others who prefer not to examine these issues deeply. Standing by your values may feel isolating, yet isolation often reveals the importance of community with shared principles. Seeking out people who value compassion and fairness helps balance the weight of awareness. Collective action, even in small forms, transforms despair into purpose. You realize you are not alone in caring. Purpose counteracts exhaustion. Buddhist teachings emphasize that suffering exists, but attachment to suffering intensifies it. If you cling to anger or despair, you carry it everywhere. If you acknowledge pain while maintaining inner calm, you remain capable of constructive action. This balance prevents moral awareness from turning into hopelessness. Calm allows clarity. Practices that cultivate inner stability become essential. Meditation, mindful breathing, and reflective writing help process emotions before they accumulate. These practices do not remove awareness of injustice. They strengthen your capacity to face it without collapsing. Resilience grows through repetition. Another important insight is recognizing the limits of empathy. You can understand suffering without absorbing it fully. Visualizing emotional boundaries, like a permeable barrier that allows understanding but prevents overwhelm, helps maintain stability. This approach respects your sensitivity while protecting your well-being. Protection ensures longevity in compassionate action. Moral awareness can also deepen gratitude. Seeing suffering highlights the value of what is working, acts of kindness, moments of fairness, examples of courage. Focusing on these positive instances balances perception and prevents cynicism. Gratitude becomes fuel for continued engagement. Hope emerges from attention to goodness. You may notice that people respond differently to your awareness. Some appreciate your honesty and insight. Others may feel uncomfortable because it challenges their avoidance. Learning to communicate compassionately rather than confrontationally increases the likelihood of productive dialogue. Gentle truth travels further than harsh criticism. Buddhist wisdom teaches that change often begins internally. By embodying fairness, patience, and kindness, you influence your environment indirectly. Your behavior becomes evidence that another way of living is possible. This subtle influence can inspire others more effectively than argument. Presence becomes a form of activism. Over time, moral awareness transforms from burden into guidance. It directs your choices, relationships, and priorities. You become someone who acts thoughtfully rather than impulsively, who considers impact rather than convenience. This intentionality creates a life that feels aligned rather than conflicted. Alignment reduces inner tension. However, exhaustion may still return during periods of intense exposure to suffering. Recognizing early signs, irritability, withdrawal, loss of motivation, allows you to rest before burnout deepens. Rest is not abandonment of your values, it is preparation to continue honoring them. Recovery sustains commitment. Nature often provides restorative contrast to human-created distress. Spending time outdoors reminds you that life continues beyond social conflict. The rhythm of natural cycles offers perspective on impermanence and renewal. This perspective reduces the sense that everything depends on your vigilance. Perspective lightens the emotional load. Another helpful practice is focusing on one meaningful cause rather than trying to address every issue simultaneously. Concentrated effort produces tangible results, which reinforces motivation. Scattered effort often leads to frustration because progress is harder to perceive. Focus creates momentum. Moral awareness also sharpens your appreciation for authenticity. When you encounter people who act with integrity, their presence feels deeply reassuring. These individuals demonstrate that awareness can coexist with joy and resilience. Their example becomes a reminder that compassion does not have to be heavy. Role models provide encouragement. As your understanding matures, you begin to see moral awareness as a form of sensitivity to interconnection. Injustice anywhere affects the whole, including you. Recognizing this connection fosters humility rather than self-righteousness. You act not from superiority, but from shared humanity. Humility keeps compassion grounded. Ultimately, living with constant moral awareness is not about carrying the world alone. It is about participating in its healing while maintaining your own stability. You learn to care deeply without letting despair define you. You discover that hope is not naive optimism, but commitment to possibility despite difficulty. Commitment sustains meaning. As moral awareness settles into something steadier, your attention begins to widen beyond individual acts of injustice. You start noticing the structure that produces them, the rules people follow without questioning, the silent agreements that shape behavior, the invisible scoreboard everyone seems to be watching. What once looked like normal life begins to resemble a carefully staged performance, and the realization is both freeing and unsettling. A quiet question starts repeating in your mind. What are we all rushing toward? There is a strange moment when awareness shifts from personal to collective. You see how status defines worth in ways that have nothing to do with character. Titles, income, appearance, popularity, they form a hierarchy that people defend as if survival depends on it. Yet beneath that defense you sense anxiety, as though everyone fears falling behind in a race no one truly understands. This perception can make ordinary conversations feel scripted. People talk about success as if it were a destination that guarantees peace, yet many who reach it still feel restless. They acquire symbols of achievement, but the satisfaction fades quickly, replaced by pressure to maintain or surpass what they have gained. Watching this cycle unfold raises uncomfortable questions about whether the system itself is designed to keep people chasing rather than arriving. Buddhist teachings describe this as attachment to identity. When people define themselves by external measures, they become dependent on conditions they cannot fully control. Awareness reveals how fragile that dependency is. A change in circumstance can dismantle years of effort, exposing the instability beneath the image of security. You begin to see how much energy is spent protecting illusions. Competition is another layer that becomes visible. From early childhood, comparison is encouraged. Grades, talents, popularity, career progress. The assumption is that competition produces excellence, but awareness notices the cost. Anxiety, resentment, fear of failure, and the erosion of cooperation. Instead of bringing out the best in people, it often brings out defensiveness. You realize that comparison narrows perception. When attention is focused on outperforming others, curiosity and creativity shrink. People choose safe paths that promise recognition rather than meaningful exploration. They become cautious about authenticity because difference risks exclusion. This conformity maintains the system but limits individual growth. Artificial urgency amplifies the pressure. Deadlines, targets, constant notifications, and the expectation of immediate responses create a sense that everything is critical. Yet when examined closely, much of this urgency serves productivity rather than well-being. It keeps people moving without time to reflect on direction. Awareness slows down enough to question the necessity of constant acceleration. You notice how silence is treated as unproductive, rest as laziness, contemplation as indulgence. The absence of motion feels uncomfortable because stillness exposes uncertainty. Without distraction, people confront questions about purpose that have been postponed indefinitely. Your willingness to sit with uncertainty changes your relationship with time. Instead of measuring value by speed, you begin valuing depth. Conversations that explore ideas feel more fulfilling than quick exchanges. Work that aligns with your values feels more meaningful than tasks completed for approval. You become less interested in multitasking because divided attention dilutes experience. Presence replaces performance as your guiding principle. This shift may create friction with environments that prioritize efficiency over reflection. You might feel out of sync with schedules that leave no room for spontaneity or recovery. Others may interpret your pace as lack of ambition, even though it reflects intentionality rather than apathy. Awareness teaches you to tolerate misunderstanding. Seeing through societal games also affects consumption habits. Advertising relies on creating dissatisfaction to drive demand. When you recognize this mechanism, you become less susceptible to it. You start asking whether desires originate within you or were planted externally. Contentment becomes a form of resistance. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes that craving perpetuates suffering because it depends on conditions outside your control. Awareness of this pattern allows you to appreciate what you already have. Satisfaction becomes less tied to acquisition and more connected to experience. Simplicity begins to feel luxurious. Another aspect of questioning society is recognizing how narratives shape perception. Stories about what constitutes a good life influence choices long before conscious evaluation. Marriage, career paths, lifestyle expectations. They are presented as milestones rather than options. Awareness restores the freedom to choose deliberately. You start designing your life based on authenticity rather than imitation. This may involve unconventional decisions that others do not immediately understand. The discomfort of deviating from norms tests your confidence, but it also reveals how much of conformity is driven by fear of judgment. Courage grows through alignment with inner truth. At the same time, questioning societal structures does not require rejection of community. It encourages participation with awareness. You engage where your values align and withdraw where they do not. This selective involvement preserves energy and integrity. Discernment replaces blind acceptance. Relationships may shift as well. Some connections were built around shared ambition or mutual validation rather than genuine understanding. As priorities change, these relationships may fade naturally. While this can feel like loss, it creates space for deeper connections rooted in authenticity. Quality begins to matter more than quantity. Awareness also reveals the paradox of control. Society promises security through planning and achievement, yet uncertainty remains unavoidable. Accepting this reality reduces anxiety because you stop expecting permanence from inherently unstable conditions. Letting go of control opens space for adaptability. You learn to approach goals as directions rather than guarantees. Effort remains important, but attachment to specific outcomes loosens. This mindset reduces fear of failure because each experience contributes to growth, regardless of result. Growth becomes the true measure of success. Another realization emerges about identity itself. Labels that once felt solid begin to seem provisional. Career roles, social status, even personality traits change over time. Clinging to fixed definitions creates tension because reality is fluid. Flexibility becomes a source of peace. Buddhist teachings highlight impermanence as a fundamental truth. Everything evolves, including systems that appear stable. Awareness of impermanence prevents overinvestment in temporary structures. You participate fully while recognizing that change is inevitable. Acceptance reduces resistance to transformation. This perspective encourages compassion for those still immersed in the societal game. Instead of judging them, you understand the comfort it provides. Structures offer predictability, and predictability feels safe. Your awareness does not require superiority, only understanding. Understanding softens isolation. Over time, questioning society leads to a quieter form of engagement. You contribute where you can, speak honestly when necessary, and withdraw when participation compromises integrity. This balanced approach prevents cynicism while preserving clarity. Clarity becomes your anchor. You may discover new forms of fulfillment outside conventional markers. Creative expression, service, learning, and connection offer satisfaction that does not depend on comparison. These activities reinforce the sense that meaning is self-generated rather than externally assigned. Meaning becomes portable. Awareness also deepens gratitude for small freedoms, the ability to choose how you spend time, what you value, whom you trust. These freedoms often go unnoticed until you recognize how easily they could disappear. Gratitude strengthens resilience. Eventually, questioning the game of society becomes less about critique and more about liberation. You stop expecting the system to provide identity or purpose. Instead, you cultivate these qualities internally. External circumstances still matter, but they no longer define your sense of self. Inner stability replaces external validation. As you loosen your grip on society's definitions of success and begin grounding your identity in something deeper, another awareness quietly enters your life. It is not loud, not dramatic, not something you can point to easily. It feels more like a soft ache that appears in peaceful moments, a realization that everything you see, everything you love, everything you depend on is already in the process of changing. Nothing stands still long enough to be held forever. A subtle sadness begins to live alongside your gratitude. You may notice it while watching someone laugh, while sitting with family, while walking through a familiar place. There is warmth in the moment, but also a quiet awareness that the moment will never exist in exactly the same way again. This does not mean you are pessimistic. It means you see time moving even when others pretend it is not. Impermanence becomes something you feel, not just something you understand. Buddhist teachings speak of impermanence as one of the fundamental truths of existence. Everything arises, changes, and fades. At first, this teaching can sound abstract, but when awareness deepens, it stops being philosophy and becomes lived experience. You notice aging in faces you see every day. You notice how quickly seasons pass. You notice how memories accumulate while the present keeps moving forward. The passage of time stops being invisible. This clarity can create a unique kind of grief. Not grief for something that has already been lost, but grief for the certainty that loss will come. You feel tenderness towards the present because you know it is temporary. Joy becomes more precious, but also more fragile. You start loving things with the awareness that you cannot keep them. Relationships often become the place where this grief is strongest. You listen to someone speak and feel a quiet appreciation that they are here now, while also sensing that circumstances will change eventually. People move, grow apart, fall ill, or pass away. Awareness does not let you forget this reality. Attachment begins to feel both beautiful and painful. This does not mean you withdraw from connection. Instead, you engage more deeply because you recognize its rarity. Every conversation becomes meaningful. Every shared experience feels like something to be cherished rather than taken for granted. Presence becomes an act of love. At the same time, you may struggle with others who avoid thinking about impermanence. When you express appreciation or concern, they may dismiss it as unnecessary worry. They prefer to believe that life will remain stable. Your awareness can make you feel out of sync with their comfort. You carry truths that others are not ready to face. Nature often mirrors this lesson. Watching leaves fall, tides shift, or flowers fade reminds you that change is the rhythm of existence. Nothing in nature resists transformation. Only human expectations create the illusion of permanence. Observing nature can soften the resistance to loss. Buddhist wisdom encourages acceptance rather than denial. When you stop fighting impermanence, grief transforms into appreciation. You begin valuing moments precisely because they will not last. Instead of clinging, you practice receiving. Receiving replaces grasping. Another effect of understanding impermanence is the way it reshapes priorities. Petty conflicts lose importance because time feels too precious to waste on resentment. You become more willing to forgive, more inclined to express love, more attentive to what truly matters. Clarity simplifies decisions. You may also notice that material possessions lose their emotional hold. Objects wear out, trends change, wealth fluctuates. Investing identity in what can disappear begins to feel unstable. You start valuing experiences and relationships more than accumulation. Meaning shifts from ownership to connection. However, silent grief can still arise unexpectedly. A familiar song, an old photograph, a place that no longer feels the same. These triggers remind you of how much has already changed. Nostalgia becomes bittersweet because it highlights the distance between past and present. Memories become both comfort and reminder. This awareness can also deepen compassion for others. Recognizing that everyone is navigating loss in some form makes you gentler in your judgments. People's fears and defensiveness often come from their struggle with impermanence, even if they do not articulate it that way. Compassion grows from shared vulnerability. Buddhist practice offers tools for working with this grief. Meditation on impermanence encourages observing change without resistance. By watching thoughts, sensations, and emotions arise and pass, you learn that nothing remains fixed. This understanding reduces fear because change becomes familiar rather than threatening. Familiarity reduces anxiety. Gratitude practices also help transform grief into appreciation. When you consciously acknowledge what is present now, you anchor yourself in the current moment instead of projecting loss into the future. This balance allows you to feel both tenderness and stability. Stability comes from acceptance, not control. Another dimension of impermanence is recognizing your own changing identity. The person you were years ago is not the person you are now. Beliefs evolve, priorities shift, perspectives deepen. Seeing this continuity of change can be unsettling, but it also confirms that growth is possible. You are not trapped by past versions of yourself. This realization can free you from rigid self-concepts. If everything changes, then limitations are not permanent either. You can learn, heal, and transform because nothing about you is fixed. Impermanence becomes a doorway to possibility. Still, there is humility in acknowledging that control over outcomes is limited. Plans may fail, relationships may end, health may fluctuate. Accepting this uncertainty encourages flexibility rather than rigidity. Flexibility allows resilience. Understanding impermanence also alters how you experience beauty. Sunsets feel more profound because they vanish quickly. Childhood laughter feels sacred because it will not last forever. Ordinary moments reveal depth when seen through the lens of transience. Beauty intensifies when you stop assuming it will repeat. You may find yourself expressing appreciation more openly, saying thank you, offering affection, acknowledging someone's impact on your life. These actions become urgent in a gentle way. You no longer postpone kindness because you know opportunities can disappear. Kindness becomes timely. This awareness can also inspire courage. Fear of embarrassment or failure loses power when compared to the inevitability of time passing. You become more willing to pursue meaningful experiences instead of waiting for perfect conditions. Action replaces hesitation. Yet the silent grief never disappears entirely. It becomes a background tone that reminds you to stay awake to life. Instead of paralyzing you, it motivates deeper engagement. You learn to hold joy and sadness together without needing one to cancel the other. Emotional complexity becomes natural. Buddhist teachings describe this balance as equanimity, the ability to remain steady while experiencing the full range of human emotions. Equanimity does not suppress grief. It provides space for it without allowing it to dominate, as space creates peace. Over time, impermanence transforms from a source of sorrow into a source of wisdom. You begin to trust that change includes renewal as well as loss. Endings make room for beginnings, even when the transition feels painful. Cycles replace linear expectations. This perspective allows you to approach life with gentleness. Instead of demanding permanence from relationships, achievements, or circumstances, you appreciate them while they are present. This appreciation creates a quieter form of happiness that does not depend on stability. Contentment becomes compatible with uncertainty. As you learn to live with impermanence instead of resisting it, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You begin noticing that the spaces that once felt familiar now feel tight, as if they were built for a version of you that no longer exists. Conversations repeat without depth. Routines feel mechanical. Places that once brought comfort now leave you restless. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything feels different. Growth quietly changed the shape of what you can tolerate. There is a strange loneliness in realizing that you have not only lost certain illusions, but also the environments that depended on those illusions. What once felt meaningful now feels shallow, not because it actually changed, but because you did. Awareness expanded, and the container stayed the same. Sensitive perception accelerates this process. When you are deeply aware, you process experiences more thoroughly than most people. You reflect, question, integrate lessons, and adjust your behavior accordingly. This continuous inner movement creates evolution that others may not notice within themselves. While they remain comfortable with patterns, you sense their limitations. Comfort begins to feel like stagnation. You may try to ignore the discomfort at first. You stay in familiar settings hoping the feeling will fade. You tell yourself you are overthinking, but the sense of misalignment persists because it is not intellectual. It is intuitive. Your nervous system recognizes that the environment no longer supports your development. Resistance only prolongs the tension. Buddhist teachings describe this as attachment to identity and conditions. People cling to what is known because uncertainty feels threatening. When awareness reduces attachment, you become more willing to face uncertainty. This willingness allows growth, but also creates distance from those who prefer stability. You start valuing authenticity over belonging. Outgrowing environments can involve physical places, social circles, or even internal habits. A job that once provided purpose may now feel empty. Friendships based on shared distraction may lose depth. Beliefs inherited from family or culture may no longer resonate. Each shift can feel like a small goodbye. Sensitive individuals often experience these transitions earlier because they notice subtle dissatisfaction before it becomes unbearable. Instead of waiting for crisis, they respond to quiet signals. This responsiveness accelerates change but can create the impression that you are always moving while others remain still. Movement becomes your natural state. However, constant evolution can be exhausting. You may long for stability but struggle to find environments that match your current awareness. The search for alignment can feel endless, especially when each stage of growth reveals new needs. Patience becomes essential. Outgrowing something does not mean rejecting it. It means recognizing that its role in your life has completed. You can appreciate what it once offered while acknowledging that staying would limit further development. Gratitude softens the departure. Another challenge is explaining this process to others. They may interpret your changes as dissatisfaction with them personally rather than with the situation. They may accuse you of being difficult, restless, or ungrateful because they do not share your internal experience. Misunderstanding can intensify isolation. Learning to communicate your needs without blaming others becomes important. You can express appreciation for shared history while clarifying that your path is evolving. This approach reduces conflict and preserves relationships where possible. Honesty builds bridges even during separation. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes non-attachment not as indifference, but as freedom from clinging. When you stop forcing yourself to stay where you no longer belong, you allow both yourself and others to move toward environments that suit them better. Freedom benefits everyone involved. Sensitivity also sharpens awareness of subtle toxicity. You notice dynamics that drain energy, patterns of manipulation, or unspoken expectations that suppress authenticity. While others may tolerate these conditions for convenience, you feel their impact immediately. Your body becomes a compass for alignment. Listening to this compass requires courage because it may lead you away from security. Leaving a stable job, relocating, or redefining relationships involves uncertainty. Yet staying in misaligned environments creates a slower form of suffering that erodes vitality over time. Choosing growth over comfort becomes a defining decision. As you transition into new spaces, you may encounter imposter feelings. New environments require new skills, new social norms, and new levels of vulnerability. Even though you outgrew the old space, you have not yet fully adapted to the new one. This in-between phase can feel disorienting. Buddhist teachings encourage acceptance of transitional states, just as seasons shift gradually. Personal evolution includes periods where identity feels fluid. Rather than rushing to establish certainty, you learn to tolerate ambiguity. Ambiguity becomes a sign of transformation. Sensitive awareness also makes you more selective about future environments. You pay attention to values, energy, and authenticity rather than surface appeal. You ask whether a place encourages growth or demands conformity. Discernment protects your trajectory. You may find yourself drawn to quieter spaces, meaningful work, or communities that prioritize depth over performance. These environments support your sensitivity instead of overwhelming it. They allow you to engage fully without constant self-protection. Alignment restores energy. Another aspect of outgrowing environments is recognizing that not everyone is meant to accompany you indefinitely. Some relationships serve specific stages of life. When that stage ends, the connection may fade naturally. This realization can be painful, but also liberating. Release creates space for new connections. Sensitive people often feel responsible for maintaining harmony, so letting go may feel like failure. Yet holding on to mismatched relationships out of obligation prevents both people from evolving freely. Letting go is sometimes an act of respect. You may also notice that solitude becomes less frightening and more necessary. Time alone allows integration of new insights without external pressure. Solitude becomes a workshop for identity rather than a sign of isolation. Reflection accelerates growth. Over time, you begin trusting the rhythm of your evolution. Instead of resisting the urge to move forward, you follow it with curiosity. Each transition becomes evidence that awareness is guiding you toward greater authenticity. Trust replaces anxiety. Buddhist practice encourages compassion for yourself during these shifts. Growth involves uncertainty, vulnerability, and occasional mistakes. Treating yourself gently prevents the process from becoming self-critical. Compassion sustains momentum. Eventually, you start recognizing patterns in your journey. Each time you outgrow an environment, it prepares you for a more aligned one. What once felt like loss reveals itself as progression. Perspective turns change into narrative. Your sensitivity, once perceived as weakness, reveals itself as an evolutionary advantage. It allows you to adapt quickly, learn deeply, and respond to life with awareness rather than inertia. Awareness becomes your strength. As this strength stabilizes, you stop apologizing for needing environments that nourish your depth. You understand that compatibility matters more than convenience. You choose spaces where you can expand without shrinking parts of yourself. Authenticity becomes non-negotiable. As you begin settling into environments that reflect your growth, a new tension quietly appears. You realize that awareness does not only change where you belong, it changes what you can tolerate pretending not to see. Situations that others dismiss as normal start feeling impossible to ignore. Conversations that rely on polite denial feel heavy. You may stay silent to keep peace, yet inside there is a clear recognition that something is not true. Once your eyes adjust to clarity, darkness no longer feels comfortable. There is a particular discomfort that comes from knowing more than you can easily express. You sense contradictions in people's words and actions. You recognize patterns repeating even when everyone insists things are different this time. You see consequences forming long before they become visible to others. And with that vision comes a quiet frustration, because awareness does not grant control, it only removes ignorance. You cannot unknow what you have already understood. Buddhist teachings describe ignorance as one of the roots of suffering, but they also acknowledge that losing ignorance can feel painful at first. Illusions provide comfort. They simplify complexity and protect the mind from uncertainty. When awareness dissolves those illusions, reality appears raw and unresolved. You see both beauty and imperfection without filters. Denial once acted as a shield, and now the shield is gone. This can affect personal relationships deeply. You may notice unhealthy dynamics that others normalize. You may understand the emotional cost of certain choices long before they are acknowledged. When you speak about these concerns, you risk being labeled negative or overly serious. When you stay silent, you feel complicit in maintaining the illusion. Silence becomes heavy. Speech becomes risky. Sensitive awareness forces you to navigate this tension carefully. You learn that timing matters. Not every truth needs to be spoken immediately, and not everyone is ready to hear it. Wisdom involves discerning when honesty will create understanding and when it will only create resistance. Discernment protects relationships without sacrificing integrity. Another challenge is witnessing self-deception. People often construct narratives that protect their identity. They justify harmful behavior, avoid responsibility, or reinterpret events to maintain a sense of control. Seeing through these narratives can create distance, because engaging with them requires pretending you do not see what you see. Pretending becomes emotionally exhausting. You may attempt to participate in light conversation, to laugh at jokes that mask discomfort, to agree with opinions that contradict your understanding. Each time, a small tension builds inside. This tension is not arrogance, it is the strain of acting against your perception. Authenticity becomes difficult to compromise. Buddhist practice encourages compassion toward those who rely on denial. People cling to illusions because they fear what lies beneath. Fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of facing their own pain. These motivations shape avoidance. Recognizing this softens judgment and replaces irritation with empathy. Empathy prevents awareness from turning into isolation. Still, empathy does not eliminate the loneliness of seeing clearly. You may long for spaces where honesty is welcomed, where difficult truths can be discussed without defensiveness. Finding such spaces can take time, especially in cultures that prioritize positivity over authenticity. You begin seeking depth rather than agreement. Awareness also changes how you view your own past. Actions or beliefs that once felt justified may now appear misguided. You recognize mistakes without the comfort of excuses. This self-awareness can bring regret, but it also creates accountability. Accountability becomes a pathway to growth. Instead of hiding from your past, you integrate it. You acknowledge the lessons it provided and the harm it may have caused. This integration allows you to move forward without denial, even if forgiveness from yourself or others takes time. Growth replaces self-protection. There is also a subtle grief in losing innocence. Not innocence in the sense of naivety, but the ease of moving through life without constant reflection. Awareness makes every decision feel significant because you understand its ripple effects. Simplicity becomes harder to maintain. Complexity becomes unavoidable. You may notice that humor changes as well. Jokes that rely on cruelty or ignorance feel uncomfortable. Entertainment that normalizes harmful behavior loses appeal. Your nervous system reacts to content differently because you recognize its implications. Sensitivity reshapes your emotional responses. Buddhist teachings emphasize right speech, communication that is truthful, beneficial, and compassionate. Applying this principle helps navigate situations where denial dominates. Instead of confronting illusions aggressively, you offer clarity gently, allowing others space to process. Gentleness increases the chance of acceptance. Awareness also requires accepting that some illusions will persist regardless of your efforts. You cannot force understanding. Letting go of the need to correct everything reduces frustration. You focus on living truthfully rather than convincing others to do the same. Example becomes more powerful than argument. Another aspect of this difficulty is recognizing societal denial. Systems often maintain stability by avoiding uncomfortable truths. Environmental impact, inequality, mental health struggles. These issues are acknowledged in theory but minimized in practice. Seeing this gap can create a sense of helplessness. Helplessness can lead to withdrawal if not balanced with purpose. Engaging in meaningful action, even on a small scale, counters this feeling. Supporting ethical initiatives, volunteering, or simply treating people with kindness becomes a way to align behavior with awareness. Action restores a sense of agency. Agency reduces despair. Awareness also sharpens intuition. You detect subtle inconsistencies before they become obvious. Trusting this intuition prevents you from being drawn into harmful situations, but it may also make you cautious. You learn to balance openness with discernment. Discernment safeguards well-being. Over time, you develop the ability to coexist with denial without absorbing it. You listen without internalizing false narratives. You participate without abandoning clarity. This balance allows you to maintain relationships while honoring your perception. Balance becomes a form of mastery. You also discover that awareness can be shared through presence rather than words. Calm honesty, steady attention, and respectful listening create an environment where truth feels less threatening. People may open up gradually, revealing doubts they had hidden even from themselves. Trust emerges from consistency. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that awakening is not a single event, but an ongoing process. Each layer of awareness reveals new challenges and new insights. The difficulty of pretending not to know what you know becomes easier as you learn to live without needing universal validation. Validation becomes internal rather than external. Eventually, the tension softens. You stop wishing you could return to ignorance because you recognize the freedom awareness provides. Even though denial offered comfort, it also limited authenticity. Clarity, despite its challenges, allows deeper connection with reality. Reality becomes a source of peace rather than fear. As you grow more comfortable living without denial, your awareness begins tracing patterns beneath everyday life. Situations that others brush off as minor irritations start revealing something deeper. A short disagreement, a misunderstood comment, a moment of tension in a routine interaction, These moments no longer feel isolated. They seem connected to larger questions about identity, meaning, and the way people protect themselves from vulnerability. What looks small on the surface begins to feel significant underneath. You may find yourself replaying conversations long after they end, not because you enjoy conflict, but because you sense there was more happening than anyone acknowledged. A simple argument about time, money, or responsibility might reveal fears of being unappreciated, unheard, or replaced. You start seeing how daily friction often carries emotional history that has nothing to do with the immediate situation. Every conflict becomes a doorway into hidden narratives. Deep perception does not allow you to dismiss these signals. Instead of labeling disagreements as personality clashes, you begin asking what they represent. Why did this comment trigger such a strong reaction? What insecurity did it touch? What expectation remained unspoken? These questions transform conflict from annoyance into insight. Insight replaces blame. Buddhist teachings emphasize that suffering often arises from attachment to identity, opinions, and expectations. When these attachments are threatened, even slightly, the mind reacts defensively. Awareness reveals this mechanism in real time. You see how people protect their sense of self even at the cost of connection. Defensiveness becomes understandable rather than frustrating. This understanding can shift how you respond. Instead of escalating tension, you may choose curiosity. You listen for what lies beneath the words rather than focusing on the words themselves. This approach often softens the interaction because it addresses the underlying need rather than the surface disagreement. Listening becomes a form of compassion. At the same time, deep perception can make conflicts feel heavier. You recognize the fragility of relationships, the difficulty of genuine communication, the layers of misunderstanding that accumulate over time. What others view as a brief argument may feel like evidence of unresolved issues that could grow if ignored. Your mind sees trajectories, not just moments. This ability can create anxiety if not balanced with trust. You may fear that every conflict signals a larger breakdown. Learning to distinguish between temporary friction and structural problems becomes essential. Not every disagreement predicts disaster. Some simply reflect human imperfection. Perspective prevents overinterpretation. Another dimension of deep perception is recognizing your own role in conflict. Instead of focusing solely on the other person's behavior, you examine your reactions. What expectation did you carry? What need did you hope would be fulfilled? Self-reflection turns conflict into an opportunity for growth rather than a battle to win. Responsibility replaces defensiveness. Buddhist mindfulness encourages observing emotions as they arise without immediately acting on them. This pause creates space for thoughtful response instead of automatic reaction. In conflict situations, this practice can transform the tone of the interaction entirely. Calm presence disrupts escalation. You may also notice how cultural conditioning shapes conflict. Many societies reward assertiveness while discouraging vulnerability. As a result, people express frustration indirectly or aggressively rather than openly admitting hurt. Deep perception recognizes these patterns and searches for authenticity beneath them. Authenticity becomes the true goal of communication. Small conflicts often reveal larger existential questions about belonging and worth. Being ignored can trigger fears of invisibility. Being criticized can awaken doubts about competence. Being dismissed can touch childhood memories of not being taken seriously. Awareness connects these reactions to their roots. Past and present intertwine within each interaction. Understanding this connection fosters empathy. Instead of viewing someone as unreasonable, you consider what experiences might have shaped their sensitivity. This perspective does not excuse harmful behavior, but it humanizes it. Humanization reduces hostility. Deep perception also highlights the impermanence of conflict itself. Intense emotions fade, perspectives shift, apologies emerge. Recognizing this cycle helps you avoid making permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. You become less likely to cut ties impulsively and more willing to allow space for resolution. Patience supports reconciliation. However, patience does not mean tolerating repeated harm. Awareness helps you identify patterns that require boundaries. If a conflict repeats without progress, it signals a deeper incompatibility or unresolved issue. Setting limits protects your well-being while acknowledging reality. Boundaries transform awareness into action. Another insight emerges about communication styles. Some people process emotions verbally, others internally. Misunderstandings occur when these styles clash. Recognizing this difference allows you to adjust expectations and avoid interpreting silence or intensity as rejection. Flexibility improves understanding. You may also observe how language shapes perception during conflict. Words can escalate or soothe depending on tone and intention. Choosing language carefully becomes a skill that prevents unnecessary harm. Speaking with clarity and respect encourages the same response in return. Language becomes a tool for healing. Buddhist teachings on right intention emphasize approaching interactions with goodwill rather than the desire to dominate. When your goal is mutual understanding rather than victory, conflict becomes collaborative instead of adversarial. Collaboration restores connection. Deep perception often leads to questioning the purpose of conflict itself. Why do people argue instead of expressing vulnerability directly? Why is admitting fear or hurt considered weakness? These questions reveal societal norms that prioritize strength over openness. Openness becomes a quiet act of courage. You may begin modeling a different approach by expressing your own feelings honestly. Saying "I felt hurt" instead of "you were wrong" shifts the focus from accusation to experience. This vulnerability invites empathy and reduces defensiveness. Vulnerability deepens trust. At times, deep perception can feel isolating because others may not engage at the same depth. They may prefer quick resolutions or avoidance. Accepting that not everyone processes conflict introspectively prevents disappointment. Acceptance preserves emotional energy. Another aspect of this awareness is recognizing humor as a coping mechanism. Jokes often diffuse tension, but can also mask unresolved issues. Sensitive perception distinguishes between healthy lightness and avoidance disguised as laughter. Discernment clarifies intention. You also start noticing how physical states influence conflict. Fatigue, stress, hunger, and overstimulation reduce patience and increase reactivity. Addressing these factors can prevent conflicts from escalating unnecessarily. Self-care becomes part of relational health. Over time, you learn to approach disagreements as opportunities to refine communication and strengthen understanding. Each resolved conflict builds confidence in your ability to navigate complexity without losing compassion. Confidence replaces fear of confrontation. Deep perception ultimately transforms how you view human interaction. Instead of seeking a life free from conflict, you recognize that tension is part of growth. Differences reveal perspectives that would otherwise remain hidden. Managed with awareness, conflict becomes a catalyst for deeper connection. Growth becomes the hidden gift of friction. As you become more skilled at seeing the hidden layers inside conflict and human behavior, another challenge quietly rises. You realize that understanding pain does not protect you from absorbing it. Every story you hear, every tension you witness, every silent struggle you sense begins to collect inside your body. Compassion, once a strength, starts to feel like an open door that never closes. You want to care, but you also want to breathe. There is a difference between feeling with someone and drowning beside them. Sensitive awareness often begins without boundaries. When you first recognize suffering clearly, your instinct is to respond fully, to offer presence, to stay open no matter how heavy the atmosphere becomes. But over time, this openness can turn into exhaustion. You notice your energy dropping after certain interactions. You feel emotionally saturated even when nothing dramatic happened. Your nervous system carries echoes of experiences that were not yours to carry. Compassion without limits quietly becomes self-neglect. Buddhist teachings describe compassion and wisdom as inseparable. Compassion feels the pain of others. Wisdom knows how much to hold. Without wisdom, compassion turns into overwhelm. With wisdom, it becomes sustainable care. This balance is what allows someone to remain kind without becoming depleted. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. Closing the emotional floodgates does not mean becoming indifferent. It means choosing when and how deeply to engage. You learn that you can listen without absorbing every detail into your own emotional body. You can support without taking responsibility for outcomes that are beyond your control. Responsibility and empathy are not the same. Many sensitive people struggle with this distinction. They feel guilty for stepping back, as if distance equals abandonment. But true compassion recognizes that burnout helps no one. When you protect your energy, you preserve your ability to show up consistently rather than intensely and briefly. Consistency matters more than intensity. Practices of mindfulness help create this balance. By observing emotions as passing states rather than permanent realities, you reduce the urge to merge with them. You learn to sit beside someone's pain without internalizing it as your own. This skill requires patience because the habit of absorbing feelings often developed over many years. Awareness retrains emotional reflexes. Physical cues become important guides. Tightness in your chest, shallow breathing, mental fatigue. These signals indicate that you are exceeding your capacity. Instead of ignoring them to appear strong, you acknowledge them as information. Your body becomes an ally in maintaining boundaries. Listening to your body prevents silent depletion. Another aspect of closing the floodgates involves redefining kindness. Kindness does not always mean saying yes. Sometimes it means declining requests that would overwhelm you. Sometimes it means encouraging someone to seek professional help instead of relying solely on your presence. Sometimes it means allowing others to face consequences so they can grow. Healthy kindness respects autonomy. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes non-attachment, which includes non-attachment to being needed. When you release the need to rescue others, you allow relationships to become more balanced. You offer support without creating dependency. This approach honors both your limits and the other person's capacity. Mutual respect replaces silent obligation. You may notice that certain people resist your boundaries. They were accustomed to your constant availability and may interpret your limits as rejection. Responding with calm consistency rather than defensiveness helps them adjust. Over time, those who value you will respect your boundaries, while others may drift away. Boundaries reveal the true nature of relationships. Closing the emotional floodgates also requires cultivating spaces where you can release accumulated tension. Solitude, creative expression, movement, and time in nature allow emotions to settle naturally. These activities are not escapes, they are forms of maintenance. Maintenance sustains compassion. Meditation practices that focus on loving kindness toward yourself are especially helpful. Sensitive individuals often direct compassion outward while neglecting themselves. Turning that kindness inward restores balance and prevents resentment from forming. Self-compassion strengthens external compassion. Another essential skill is distinguishing between empathy and projection. Sometimes you feel someone's pain because it resonates with your own unresolved experiences. Recognizing this overlap prevents confusion and allows you to address your own needs instead of merging them with someone else's story. Clarity separates past from present. Over time, you learn to approach emotional engagement intentionally. Before entering a heavy conversation or environment, you ground yourself. You remind yourself of your limits. You set an internal intention to remain present without absorbing more than you can process. Preparation transforms vulnerability into strength. Sensitive awareness also becomes more selective. You choose where to invest your energy rather than reacting automatically to every call for attention. This selectivity is not selfish. It is strategic compassion. It ensures that your support is meaningful rather than scattered. Focus amplifies impact. You may discover that humor and lightness can coexist with compassion. Laughter releases tension and reminds both you and others that suffering does not define the entire experience. This balance prevents interactions from becoming emotionally suffocating. Lightness keeps connection alive. Buddhist teachings often compare the mind to water. When undisturbed, it reflects clearly. When agitated, it distorts perception. Protecting your emotional equilibrium allows you to respond wisely rather than impulsively. Calm presence becomes your most valuable offering. Calm is contagious. Another realization emerges about the difference between sympathy and compassion. Sympathy can create distance by focusing on how unfortunate someone's situation is. Compassion emphasizes shared humanity and possibility. By staying grounded, you communicate solidarity rather than pity. Grounded compassion empowers rather than diminishes. As you refine this skill, you stop fearing emotional intensity. You know you can engage deeply when necessary and step back when needed. This confidence replaces the earlier sense of vulnerability that made you either withdraw completely or overextend yourself. Flexibility becomes your protection. Closing the floodgates also involves forgiving yourself for past overexertion. You acted with the awareness you had at the time. Recognizing your growth allows you to move forward without shame. Growth includes learning through imbalance. Sensitive people often discover that boundaries improve their relationships rather than weaken them. When you are not overwhelmed, you listen more attentively, respond more thoughtfully, and remain present longer. Your presence becomes steadier and more reliable. Stability builds trust. Buddhist practice ultimately teaches the middle path, avoiding extremes of indifference and over-identification. This path allows you to remain open-hearted while maintaining inner peace. Compassion becomes a steady flame instead of a wildfire. Balance preserves warmth without destruction. Over time, you realize that caring for yourself is part of caring for others. Your well-being influences every interaction. By protecting your energy, you ensure that your kindness remains genuine rather than forced. Authenticity sustains connection. As you learn to care without drowning and to protect your energy without hardening your heart, another tension quietly reveals itself. You begin noticing how often people rush to cover pain with cheerful phrases, how quickly discomfort is replaced with forced smiles, how silence around difficult truths is filled with bright words that feel strangely hollow. You are not against hope, but something inside you resists pretending that everything is fine when it clearly is not. There is a difference between peace and avoidance dressed as positivity. Sensitive awareness makes it hard to accept surface-level reassurance when deeper emotions are still present. When someone is grieving and is told to stay strong, you feel the pressure behind those words. When someone is struggling and hears everything happens for a reason, you sense how that statement closes the door on honest expression. Artificial positivity often prioritizes comfort over authenticity, and sensitive minds can feel that trade immediately. You begin craving honesty more than encouragement. Artificial positivity is built on the fear of discomfort. Many people believe that acknowledging pain will make it worse, so they try to neutralize it with optimism. Yet, unacknowledged pain does not disappear. It simply moves inward where it becomes harder to process. Awareness recognizes this pattern and refuses to participate in it. Truth becomes more healing than reassurance. Buddhist teachings emphasize right understanding, which involves seeing reality clearly rather than through wishful thinking. Suffering is not denied or minimized. It is acknowledged as part of existence, not as a failure of attitude. This perspective allows space for genuine healing because it begins with acceptance. Acceptance feels more respectful than forced hope. Sensitive individuals often feel alienated in environments that demand constant positivity. Workplaces that celebrate relentless enthusiasm, social circles that avoid serious conversations, communities that equate happiness with success, these spaces can feel exhausting. You may find yourself smiling outwardly while feeling disconnected inwardly. Disconnection becomes the cost of fitting in. Rejecting artificial positivity does not mean rejecting joy. It means preferring authentic joy over performative happiness. Authentic joy coexists with awareness of pain. It does not erase it. It emerges from presence rather than denial. Presence allows emotions to coexist without conflict. Sensitive minds also notice how positivity can be used to silence valid concerns. When someone points out injustice or difficulty and is told to look on the bright side, their experience is minimized. Awareness recognizes this as a subtle form of dismissal. Being heard matters more than being cheered up. You may begin choosing conversations more carefully, seeking people who can hold complexity without rushing to fix it. With these individuals, you can express doubt, sadness, or uncertainty without being met with platitudes. Such interactions feel nourishing because they respect your emotional reality. Depth replaces superficial comfort. Artificial positivity often arises from the discomfort people feel with their own emotions. They project optimism outward to avoid confronting what they carry inside. Understanding this softens frustration. Instead of judging them, you see their behavior as self-protection. Compassion replaces irritation. Buddhist wisdom encourages equanimity, the ability to remain steady amid both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. Equanimity differs from positivity because it does not favor one emotion over another. It allows joy without clinging and sorrow without resistance. Balance becomes more appealing than constant brightness. Sensitive awareness also reshapes your relationship with language. Words that once sounded encouraging may now feel empty if they lack sincerity. You become attentive to tone, timing, and intention. A simple acknowledgement delivered with presence can mean more than elaborate reassurance delivered automatically. Sincerity carries emotional weight. You may also struggle with self-imposed positivity. Cultural messages often teach that negative feelings are weaknesses to be overcome quickly. Sensitive individuals internalize these messages and pressure themselves to be okay even when they are not. Awareness exposes this pattern and invites gentleness instead. Self-honesty becomes a form of care. Allowing yourself to feel fully without labeling emotions as good or bad creates space for integration. Sadness can coexist with gratitude. Anger can coexist with love. Fear can coexist with courage. Artificial positivity demands emotional uniformity, but awareness embraces complexity. Complexity reflects reality more accurately than simplicity. Another aspect of this struggle involves social expectations. Celebrations, milestones, and gatherings often assume collective happiness. If your internal state does not match the atmosphere, you may feel compelled to perform enthusiasm. This performance drains energy because it requires suppressing authenticity. Authenticity becomes more valuable than approval. Sensitive people often become safe spaces for others because they do not dismiss difficult feelings. People who feel misunderstood elsewhere may gravitate toward you. While this can deepen connection, it can also intensify your exposure to pain. Maintaining boundaries remains important to prevent imbalance. Supporting others does not require absorbing everything. Buddhist practice teaches that suffering decreases when we stop resisting what is present. Artificial positivity resists unpleasant reality by replacing it prematurely. Honest presence acknowledges reality first, allowing transformation to occur naturally rather than forcibly. Transformation follows acceptance, not denial. You may discover that silence can be more compassionate than words. Sitting beside someone without trying to fix their feelings communicates solidarity. It reassures them that they do not have to perform strength or happiness for your comfort. Shared presence dissolves loneliness. Over time, rejecting artificial positivity clarifies your values. You prioritize authenticity, empathy, and understanding over appearances. This clarity influences your choices, from relationships to work to personal habits. You gravitate toward environments that welcome truth. Alignment reduces internal conflict. Sensitive awareness also deepens appreciation for genuine optimism. When hope arises organically rather than being imposed, it feels steady and believable. You learn to distinguish between optimism that denies reality and optimism that emerges from resilience. Resilient hope coexists with awareness of difficulty. Buddhist teachings describe joy as a natural quality that arises when the mind is clear. It is not manufactured or forced. It appears when conditions allow, like sunlight emerging when clouds pass. This understanding relieves pressure to feel a certain way at all times. Emotions become weather rather than identity. As you practice honest presence, you may inspire others to relax their own defenses. When someone sees that you can hold pain without collapsing, they feel permission to be real. Authenticity spreads quietly, creating pockets of genuine connection within environments dominated by performance. Authenticity becomes contagious in the best way. Eventually, you stop apologizing for not participating in artificial positivity. You accept that your sensitivity is not negativity, it is clarity. You value being grounded over being perceived as cheerful. This confidence stabilizes your interactions and reduces the need for explanation. Clarity becomes a form of peace. As you grow more comfortable living with honesty instead of artificial comfort, your awareness begins to notice another kind of quiet sorrow. It is not about your own life this time. It appears when you look at people you care about and sense the strength, intelligence, kindness, or creativity inside them. Qualities that remain unused because fear, habit, or doubt keeps them small. You see what they could become, and the distance between that possibility and their current reality hurts in a way that is difficult to explain. There is a grief that comes from watching someone settle for less than their own capacity. Sensitive perception makes potential visible. You notice the moments when someone speaks passionately about a dream, but quickly dismisses it. You hear the hesitation in their voice when they talk about change. You see the patterns that keep repeating even when the outcome is always the same. Others may interpret these moments as personality traits, but you sense that they are defenses against uncertainty. Unrealized potential feels like a story paused before its most meaningful chapter. This awareness can create a quiet frustration because you cannot force transformation. Growth requires willingness, and willingness cannot be imposed from outside. You may offer encouragement, share insights, or create opportunities, yet the final step must come from them. Watching that step remain untaken can feel like witnessing time slip away. Helplessness becomes part of compassion. Buddhist teachings emphasize that attachment to outcomes leads to suffering. When you become attached to someone's growth, you unintentionally place expectations on their journey. Awareness invites you to support without controlling, to care without demanding progress on your timeline. Letting go of control becomes an act of respect. Still, the emotional weight does not disappear easily. You may question whether you should say more, do more, or intervene differently. You replay conversations, wondering if the right words could have sparked change. This internal dialogue reflects your desire to alleviate suffering, even when that suffering is self-created. You learn that insight alone does not guarantee action. Many people avoid their potential because it requires confronting discomfort. Change disrupts identity, challenges relationships, and introduces uncertainty. Staying the same may be limiting, but it feels predictable. Sensitive awareness recognizes this trade-off and understands why people choose safety over expansion. Fear often disguises itself as contentment. Witnessing this can deepen empathy. Instead of viewing someone as lazy or indifferent, you see the invisible barriers they face. Past disappointments, criticism, or lack of support may have shaped their self-perception. Understanding these influences softens judgment and replaces it with patience. Patience becomes a form of quiet support. At the same time, you may need to accept that not everyone seeks the same depth of experience. Some people prioritize stability, familiarity, or comfort over growth. Their definition of fulfillment may differ from yours. Recognizing this difference prevents resentment from forming. Different paths do not invalidate each other. Sensitive individuals often feel responsible for helping others awaken to their abilities. This sense of responsibility can become burdensome if you measure your success by their progress. Buddhist wisdom encourages compassion that does not depend on results. You offer what you can and release the rest. Offering without attachment preserves peace. You may also notice how societal expectations influence people's choices. Cultural norms often reward conformity more than originality. Pursuing unconventional paths can invite criticism or isolation. Observing someone abandon their dreams to maintain approval can feel painful because you understand the cost. Approval can become a subtle cage. In some cases, people internalize negative beliefs about themselves so deeply that they cannot imagine another reality. They dismiss compliments, minimize achievements, or avoid opportunities because they do not believe they deserve them. Sensitive awareness sees this self-limitation clearly and longs for them to experience their own worth. Encouragement must be gentle to be effective. Direct confrontation can trigger defensiveness, reinforcing the very barriers you hope to dissolve. Instead, modeling authenticity and growth in your own life can inspire indirectly. When people witness someone living aligned with their potential, it challenges their assumptions about what is possible. Example communicates more than persuasion. There is also a bittersweet recognition that some lessons can only be learned through experience. You may foresee consequences that others cannot yet see, but interfering too strongly can prevent them from discovering insight on their own. Trusting their journey requires humility. Humility acknowledges the limits of perception. Witnessing wasted potential can also motivate reflection on your own life. It prompts questions about where you might be holding back, where fear may still influence your decisions. Instead of focusing solely on others, you turn the lens inward. Self-awareness prevents projection. Buddhist teachings emphasize compassion for all beings, including those who resist change. This compassion arises from understanding that everyone seeks happiness, even if their methods lead to suffering. Recognizing this shared desire dissolves the illusion of separation. Shared humanity replaces frustration. Another layer of this experience involves grief for what might never happen. When someone consistently chooses avoidance, certain possibilities fade quietly. You mourn not just the person they are now, but the version of them that might have existed under different circumstances. Grief honors unrealized futures. Sensitive awareness also reveals that growth is not linear. People may remain stagnant for years and then transform suddenly when conditions align. Holding space for that possibility prevents despair from solidifying into cynicism. Hope remains without expectation. You may learn to celebrate small signs of change rather than waiting for dramatic transformation. A moment of honesty, a willingness to try something new, a shift in perspective. These subtle movements indicate that potential is not lost, only dormant. Recognition reinforces progress. Buddhist practice encourages loving kindness, which involves wishing well-being for others regardless of their choices. This attitude frees you from the burden of needing to see immediate results. Your care becomes unconditional rather than transactional. Unconditional care reduces emotional strain. At times, distance may be necessary. Constant exposure to self-limiting behavior can drain your energy and influence your mindset. Stepping back allows you to maintain clarity without becoming entangled in patterns you cannot change. Distance can be a form of compassion for yourself. Over time, you begin to understand that potential is deeply personal. What appears as wasted from one perspective may feel sufficient from another. Respecting this diversity of experience prevents you from imposing your standards on others. Respect nurtures healthier relationships. Sensitive perception ultimately teaches that witnessing is itself a role. You may not guide someone's transformation, but your presence can offer silent encouragement. Knowing that someone believes in their capacity may plant seeds that grow later. Belief can outlast immediate influence. As you integrate this understanding, the pain softens into a quieter awareness. You continue caring without carrying the weight of outcomes. You recognize that each person's path unfolds according to forces beyond your comprehension. Acceptance replaces urgency, and as this acceptance deepens, another awareness begins to surface. A heightened sensitivity to the passage of time itself, a constant perception of how quickly moments dissolve even while they are happening. As acceptance softens the urge to control other people's paths, your attention begins to shift towards something even more unavoidable. You start noticing not just what people are doing with their lives, but how quickly life itself is moving. Conversations end sooner than they feel like they should. Familiar places change without warning. Faces age in ways that are subtle but undeniable. Moments that once felt permanent reveal themselves as brief pauses in a much larger flow. There is a quiet ache that comes from realizing nothing is staying. This awareness does not arrive as panic, but as a constant background signal. You begin to feel time passing in ordinary situations, while waiting in traffic, while listening to someone speak, while watching the sky shift colors at sunset. Instead of drifting through these moments, you feel their fragility. Each one carries the weight of being unrepeatable. Presence becomes both a gift and a burden. Sensitive awareness dissolves the illusion that life will slow down later. The idea of someday starts to feel uncertain. Plans and goals no longer feel like distant landmarks. They feel like fragile intentions placed inside an unpredictable timeline. You sense how easily time rearranges priorities without asking for permission. Uncertainty replaces the comfort of assumption. Buddhist teachings on impermanence describe this clearly. Everything that arises will pass. This principle applies not only to suffering, but also to joy, relationships, health, and identity. When this truth moves from concept to direct perception, it changes how you experience every interaction. Attachment becomes complicated when nothing lasts. You may find yourself holding on to small details more tightly: the sound of a loved one's laughter, the texture of a familiar place, the warmth of a quiet moment. These details feel precious because you know they cannot be stored or revisited in the same way later. Memory becomes a form of preservation. At times, this awareness can create restlessness. You feel pressure to use time wisely, to avoid regret, to make each day meaningful. Yet this pressure can paradoxically make it harder to relax. Even leisure can feel overshadowed by the awareness that time is moving regardless of how you spend it. The desire to honor time can interfere with enjoying it. Sensitive perception also notices how society treats time as a commodity. Productivity, efficiency, deadlines. These structures encourage measuring life in units of output. When you are deeply aware of impermanence, this transactional view of time can feel unsettling. You sense that life is more than schedules and milestones. Meaning begins to outweigh achievement. You may experience grief for moments that are still happening. Sitting with someone you care about, you feel the knowledge that this exact configuration of circumstances will never occur again. This awareness deepens appreciation, but also introduces a quiet sadness. Beauty becomes inseparable from loss. Buddhist practice encourages embracing impermanence rather than resisting it. Instead of trying to freeze moments, you learn to participate fully while they exist. This participation transforms fleeting experiences into meaningful ones without requiring permanence. Participation replaces preservation. Another effect of heightened awareness of time is a shift in priorities. Activities that once felt urgent may lose importance, while simple experiences gain value. You may prefer meaningful conversations over superficial entertainment, solitude over constant stimulation, depth over distraction. Depth feels more aligned with reality. Sensitive individuals often become more selective about how they spend their days. You notice which interactions leave you energized and which drain you. This discernment helps protect the limited resource of attention, which is ultimately how you experience time. Attention determines the texture of life. There is also a recognition that time is not experienced uniformly. Some moments feel expansive, others compressed. When you are fully present, time seems to slow. When you are distracted, it accelerates. Awareness invites you to cultivate presence to expand your sense of living. Presence stretches perception of time. You may begin developing rituals that anchor you in the moment. Mindful breathing, observing nature, savoring meals, listening without multitasking. These practices counterbalance the feeling of time slipping away by grounding you in immediate experience. Grounding transforms anxiety into appreciation. Buddhist teachings describe mindfulness as a way to step outside the illusion of past and future. By focusing on what is happening now, you reduce the mental habit of projecting forward or replaying backward. This shift reduces the emotional weight of impermanence. Now becomes a refuge rather than a fleeting point. Sensitive awareness also heightens empathy toward older generations. You begin to understand the quiet nostalgia in their stories, the tenderness in how they speak about the past. Time becomes a shared experience that connects rather than separates. Understanding replaces distance. You may also feel a renewed urgency to express love and gratitude. Waiting for perfect moments becomes less appealing because you recognize that opportunities are not guaranteed. Words left unspoken start to feel heavier than those expressed imperfectly. Expression becomes more important than timing. At times, awareness of time passing can create existential questioning. You reflect on purpose, legacy, and what truly matters. These reflections are not signs of distress, but indicators of engagement with life's depth. Questioning becomes a form of awakening. Sensitive perception can also bring relief. If everything is temporary, then pain is not permanent either. Difficult emotions, conflicts, and challenges will change over time. This understanding introduces hope without denying reality. Impermanence applies to suffering as well. You begin to see life as a series of transitions rather than fixed stages. Identity, roles, and circumstances evolve continuously. Accepting this fluidity reduces fear of change and increases adaptability. Flexibility becomes a source of resilience. Relationships also transform under this awareness. You value presence over permanence, quality over duration. Knowing that connections may shift or end encourages you to engage authentically while they exist. Authenticity strengthens bonds. Buddhist wisdom describes impermanence not as a tragedy, but as the condition that makes growth possible. Without change, there would be no learning, no healing, no transformation. Awareness of time passing reveals the dynamic nature of existence. Change becomes the foundation of renewal. Over time, the hyperconsciousness softens into a quieter sensitivity. You still feel time moving, but it no longer dominates your experience. Instead, it informs your choices gently, reminding you to live intentionally without rushing. Intentional living replaces anxious urgency. As you become more aware of time, presence, and the fragile nature of every moment, another shift quietly takes place inside you. The need for constant reassurance begins to fade. Approval no longer feels like oxygen. Praise feels pleasant, but not necessary. Criticism loses its power to define you. You start making decisions based on alignment rather than applause. And yet, as this independence grows, something unexpected appears alongside it. A silence where familiar forms of connection used to be. Freedom from approval can feel like standing alone in an open space. Validation once acted as a bridge between you and other people. Shared opinions, mutual praise, group identity. These things created a sense of belonging. When you outgrow the need for them, the bridge does not disappear immediately, but it becomes less traveled. You notice conversations that revolve around comparison or approval feel less engaging. Compliments that once lifted your mood now pass through you without leaving a strong impact. External noise loses its emotional grip. This change can be confusing because it removes both pressure and comfort at the same time. Without the need to impress, you feel lighter. Without the reinforcement of approval, you may also feel less visible. Human beings are social by nature, and even when you no longer depend on validation, the desire for connection remains. Independence does not cancel the need to be understood. Sensitive awareness makes this paradox more noticeable. You can feel complete within yourself while still sensing the absence of resonance with others. You are no longer seeking approval, but you still long for recognition at a deeper level, not for what you achieve, but for who you are. Recognition becomes more meaningful than validation. Buddhist teachings describe the concept of non-attachment to praise and blame. When you stop clinging to positive feedback and stop fearing negative feedback, your mind stabilizes. However, this stability can create distance from environments built on evaluation. Spaces driven by competition or comparison may feel less inviting. Calmness can appear as detachment to those who rely on excitement. You may notice that people respond differently to you. Some admire your self-assurance, while others interpret it as disinterest or superiority. Without actively seeking approval, your behavior disrupts social patterns that depend on mutual reinforcement. This disruption can unintentionally create distance. Authenticity changes relational dynamics. Outgrowing validation also reshapes your internal dialogue. Decisions become quieter because they are no longer rehearsed for external acceptance. You trust your intuition more. This trust feels grounding, yet it also means you have fewer places to externalize uncertainty. Self-trust reduces the need for constant discussion. Loneliness can arise not from isolation, but from misalignment. You may still be surrounded by people, yet feel that your motivations, concerns, and reflections operate on a different wavelength. Conversations may skim the surface while your thoughts move deeper. Depth without shared language creates quiet distance. Sensitive individuals often become observers in social settings. You participate, but you also notice the underlying patterns, how people seek reassurance, how status influences interaction, how silence makes others uncomfortable. This observation can make it difficult to fully immerse yourself. Awareness can separate you from spontaneity. At the same time, you may feel relief from no longer performing. Without the pressure to maintain an image, your energy becomes more stable. You are free to express uncertainty, admit mistakes, or change direction without fearing judgment. Freedom replaces performance anxiety. Buddhist wisdom suggests that true belonging begins with belonging to yourself. When you accept your nature fully, you no longer need to shape it to fit expectations. This internal belonging provides stability even when external connections fluctuate. Self-acceptance becomes a foundation. Yet being human means still desiring companionship. You may find yourself searching for relationships built on authenticity rather than validation. These connections are rarer but more fulfilling because they do not depend on constant reinforcement. Quality replaces quantity in relationships. Outgrowing validation also changes your relationship with success. Achievements feel meaningful when aligned with your values, not when they attract admiration. Recognition becomes secondary to purpose. This shift can make traditional measures of success feel less motivating. Purpose becomes a stronger driver than approval. You may experience moments of nostalgia for the simplicity of earlier stages, when belonging felt easier because it was based on shared approval seeking. Awareness brings clarity, but clarity sometimes removes comforting illusions. Clarity can feel like losing a familiar shelter. Sensitive perception also reveals that many people depend on validation because they lack internal stability. Recognizing this fosters compassion rather than judgment. You understand that their need for approval is not weakness, but a strategy for navigating uncertainty. Compassion bridges the gap created by difference. Loneliness softens when you encounter individuals who have also outgrown validation. With them, conversations flow without performance. Silence feels comfortable. Presence replaces the need for constant affirmation. Shared awareness creates quiet companionship. Buddhist teachings emphasize interconnectedness, the idea that separation is partly an illusion created by perception. Even when you feel alone, you are part of a larger network of experiences and relationships. Remembering this perspective reduces the sense of isolation. Connection exists beyond immediate interaction. You may also discover new forms of belonging through creative expression, service, or spiritual practice. These activities connect you with others who value authenticity over approval. They create communities centered on shared intention rather than comparison. Intentional communities provide grounding. Outgrowing validation teaches you to appreciate solitude without fearing it. Solitude becomes a space for reflection, restoration, and creativity rather than a sign of exclusion. You learn to enjoy your own company as much as others. Solitude transforms from emptiness into nourishment. At times, loneliness still appears unexpectedly. It may surface during celebrations, transitions, or quiet evenings. Instead of resisting it, you acknowledge it as part of the human experience. Loneliness does not mean you have made the wrong choices. It means you are aware of connection's importance. Acknowledgement reduces emotional resistance. Over time, the loneliness evolves into a quieter presence that coexists with peace. You understand that independence and connection are not opposites, but complementary forces. You can stand alone while remaining open to meaningful bonds. Balance replaces the need for extremes. Sensitive awareness ultimately reveals that approval was never the true source of belonging. Genuine connection arises from shared authenticity, not shared performance. When you live aligned with your values, you attract people who resonate naturally. Resonance replaces validation as the basis of connection. As you begin forming connections based on resonance rather than approval, another layer of awareness quietly unfolds. You start noticing how often society equates success with possession, how achievement is measured by what can be displayed, counted, or admired from a distance. Yet when you look closely at people who have accumulated everything they were told would bring fulfillment, you sometimes sense an emptiness behind the surface. The contrast between appearance and inner state becomes difficult to ignore. There is a difference between having everything and feeling whole. Sensitive perception makes you aware of the emotional atmosphere surrounding material success. You can feel when pride is mixed with exhaustion, when excitement fades quickly after a new purchase, when accomplishments fail to satisfy the deeper longing for meaning. Others may celebrate the visible outcome, but you sense the quiet question beneath it. What now? Achievement without purpose begins to feel weightless. Material success promises stability and recognition, but it cannot answer questions about identity or belonging. When sensitivity deepens, external markers lose their ability to define your worth. You may still appreciate comfort and security, yet they no longer feel like the center of existence. Security becomes a tool rather than a destination. Buddhist teachings describe attachment to material gain as a source of suffering because it creates dependency on conditions that constantly change. Wealth can be lost, status can shift, trends can fade. Awareness recognizes that tying happiness to unstable foundations creates vulnerability. Impermanence applies to possessions as much as experiences. You may start observing how consumption is often used to fill emotional gaps. Shopping, collecting, upgrading, these actions can momentarily distract from dissatisfaction, but rarely resolve it. Sensitive awareness detects the cycle: anticipation, acquisition, brief pleasure, then a return to restlessness. Temporary relief cannot replace lasting fulfillment. This realization does not require rejecting comfort or success. It involves understanding their limitations. A comfortable environment can support well-being, but it cannot create inner peace on its own. Recognition can open doors, but it cannot replace authentic connection. External conditions influence life, but do not complete it. Sensitive individuals often feel conflicted in environments where success is measured primarily by accumulation. Conversations may revolve around salary, possessions, or status symbols, leaving little room for discussions about purpose or emotional experience. You may feel present physically, but distant mentally. Surface-level metrics fail to capture inner reality. You also notice how material success can create pressure to maintain appearances. Once a certain lifestyle is established, deviation may invite judgment. This pressure can trap individuals in cycles of overwork or anxiety, preventing them from enjoying what they have achieved. Maintenance becomes a hidden cost of achievement. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes contentment as an internal state rather than a product of circumstances. Contentment arises when the mind stops chasing more and begins appreciating what is already present. Sensitive awareness finds this perspective liberating because it shifts the focus from accumulation to experience. Gratitude becomes more stabilizing than acquisition. Witnessing the emptiness of material success can also deepen empathy. People who appear successful externally may still struggle internally with loneliness, insecurity, or lack of direction. Understanding this dissolves envy and replaces it with compassion. Comparison loses its emotional intensity. You may begin redefining success for yourself. Instead of asking how much you have, you ask how aligned your life feels. Instead of measuring influence by visibility, you consider the depth of your impact on those around you. This redefinition brings clarity. Alignment becomes a more meaningful metric. Sensitive perception also highlights the importance of time over possessions. Experiences shared with loved ones, moments of presence, creative expression, these leave lasting impressions that material objects cannot replicate. Memories become a form of wealth that does not depreciate. Experience outweighs ownership. There may be periods of confusion as you navigate this shift. Pursuits that once motivated you may feel less compelling, yet new directions are not fully formed. This transitional phase can feel like standing between two definitions of success, without fully belonging to either. Transition requires patience. Buddhist teachings encourage exploring intention behind actions. When you pursue goals from fear or comparison, the outcome often feels hollow. When actions arise from curiosity or service, fulfillment emerges regardless of external results. Intention shapes the quality of achievement. Sensitive awareness also reveals how marketing and cultural narratives influence desire. Constant exposure to images of idealized lifestyles can create artificial dissatisfaction. Recognizing this manipulation helps you reclaim autonomy over your aspirations. Clarity protects against manufactured discontent. You may start simplifying aspects of your life intentionally, reducing unnecessary consumption, focusing on meaningful activities, prioritizing relationships. These choices create space for reflection and calm. Simplicity becomes a form of freedom. Less can feel lighter than more. Another aspect of this realization involves legacy. Material success often aims to leave something tangible behind, yet intangible contributions, kindness, wisdom, inspiration, can influence lives more profoundly. Sensitive awareness values these invisible forms of impact. Influence does not always require visibility. You might also discover joy in creating rather than acquiring. Building something meaningful, helping someone grow, expressing an idea. These acts generate satisfaction that accumulation rarely provides. Creation engages the mind and heart simultaneously. Contribution replaces consumption as a source of fulfillment. At times, you may feel misunderstood by those who still prioritize material markers. They may interpret your perspective as lack of ambition or appreciation. Explaining the shift can be difficult because it involves internal transformation rather than external evidence. Inner changes are harder to communicate. Buddhist wisdom describes the middle path, which avoids extremes of indulgence and deprivation. This approach allows you to enjoy comfort without becoming dependent on it. Balance prevents rejection of the material world while preserving awareness of its limitations. Balance integrates practicality with insight. Sensitive perception ultimately reveals that meaning cannot be purchased or displayed. It emerges from how you engage with life, how you treat others, how you understand yourself. This understanding brings a quieter sense of purpose that does not rely on comparison. Purpose becomes independent of status. As this perspective stabilizes, material success loses its illusion of completeness. It becomes one aspect of life rather than the defining feature. You appreciate what it can provide without expecting it to fill emotional or existential gaps. Perspective transforms relationship with wealth. And as this clarity settles into your daily experience, another awareness begins to surface. A deeper sensitivity to the subtle currents of peace that exist beneath noise and striving. A recognition that fulfillment may lie not in what is added to life, but in what is gently released. As the chase for material meaning loosens its grip, space begins to open inside your perception. Without the constant noise of comparison and accumulation, your attention starts settling on things that once felt too small to notice. A quiet morning light touching the wall, the softness in someone's voice when they speak gently, the brief stillness that appears between two sounds. What once seemed ordinary now carries a quiet depth that feels almost sacred. There is a kind of joy that does not announce itself. Sensitive awareness transforms the way you experience the world by slowing your perception. Instead of scanning for what is impressive or useful, your mind becomes receptive to what is subtle. Beauty reveals itself not through intensity, but through presence. It exists in textures, pauses, and details that require patience to perceive. Attention becomes the doorway to quiet wonder. Buddhist teachings often speak about mindfulness as a way of returning to the immediacy of experience. When the mind is not preoccupied with past regrets or future plans, it becomes available to what is happening now. In this state, even simple sensations, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of breathing, the movement of leaves, feel vivid and alive. Ordinary moments become sources of nourishment. You may begin noticing how often people rush past beauty because they are focused on destinations rather than experiences. Walking quickly to the next task, scrolling through moments instead of inhabiting them, speaking without listening. These habits create a life that feels efficient but thin. Awareness interrupts this pattern. Slowness restores richness to perception. Sensitive individuals often feel a quiet connection to nature because natural environments operate without pretense. The sky does not perform for approval. Water does not rush to prove its value. Trees grow without comparing themselves. Observing these rhythms can feel calming because they mirror a deeper order beyond human urgency. Nature offers stability without expectation. Beauty also appears in human interactions when you pay attention. The sincerity in someone's laughter, the vulnerability in a hesitant confession, the unspoken understanding between friends, these moments carry emotional depth that cannot be staged. Awareness recognizes their significance. Connection becomes an art of noticing. There is also beauty in solitude when it is chosen rather than imposed. Sitting quietly without distraction allows subtle thoughts and feelings to surface. Instead of fearing emptiness, you discover that stillness contains its own texture. It feels spacious rather than lonely. Silence becomes a companion rather than a void. Buddhist wisdom describes joy as a natural quality that emerges when craving subsides. When you are not constantly seeking stimulation, your mind becomes sensitive to quieter forms of satisfaction. A simple meal, a familiar scent, a gentle breeze, these experiences feel complete without needing enhancement. Contentment grows from appreciation rather than excess. Sensitive awareness also reveals beauty in imperfection. Weathered surfaces, aging faces, unfinished projects, these carry stories that polished appearances often hide. Instead of seeking flawless outcomes, you begin valuing authenticity. Imperfection becomes evidence of life lived. You may find that creative expression deepens this perception. Writing, drawing, music, or any form of creation trains the mind to observe details more carefully. Creation requires attention, and attention amplifies awareness of beauty. Expression sharpens perception. Another aspect of subtle beauty involves emotional nuance. You become attuned to the quiet shifts in your own feelings, the calm that follows release, the relief after honesty, the warmth that appears when you forgive yourself. These internal experiences are as meaningful as external ones. Inner landscapes contain their own beauty. Sensitive individuals often feel gratitude more intensely because they recognize how easily moments could have been different. Gratitude does not arise from obligation, but from awareness of fragility. Knowing that nothing is guaranteed heightens appreciation. Gratitude transforms fleeting moments into lasting impressions. Buddhist practice encourages loving kindness, which extends gentle goodwill toward oneself and others. Practicing this mindset softens perception, allowing beauty to appear even in challenging situations. Compassion reveals humanity where judgment once dominated. Kindness clarifies vision. You may also notice how beauty emerges from contrast. A quiet pause after noise, a cool breeze after heat, rest after effort. These transitions highlight experiences that might otherwise go unnoticed. Awareness makes you sensitive to these shifts. Contrast deepens appreciation. Sensitive perception can transform routine into ritual. Preparing tea becomes an act of presence. Cleaning a space becomes a form of care. Walking becomes an opportunity to observe rather than simply travel. These rituals anchor you in the moment. Ritual brings intention to everyday actions. There is also beauty in witnessing growth, whether in yourself or others. Subtle changes in perspective, resilience after difficulty, renewed hope after disappointment. These transformations often occur quietly. Awareness recognizes them even when they are not celebrated publicly. Growth often unfolds without spectacle. Buddhist teachings describe the mind as naturally luminous when free from agitation. This luminosity allows perception to become clearer and more receptive. Beauty is not something added to the world. It is something revealed when the mind is calm enough to see it. Calmness uncovers what was always present. Sensitive individuals may also develop a deeper appreciation for art, literature, and music, because these forms capture subtle emotions and experiences. Art becomes a mirror that reflects aspects of life that are difficult to articulate directly. Art translates silent feelings into shared understanding. You may discover that beauty can coexist with sadness, a melancholic song, a fading sunset, a farewell conversation. These moments carry emotional complexity that feels profound rather than purely painful. Awareness allows you to hold both feelings simultaneously. Bittersweet experiences often feel the most real. Another realization emerges about presence as a form of love. When you give someone your full attention without distraction, you communicate value more powerfully than through words. This quality of presence creates meaningful connection. Attention becomes an expression of care. Sensitive awareness ultimately reveals that quiet joy does not depend on extraordinary circumstances. It arises from how deeply you engage with what is already here. When you stop overlooking subtle beauty, life feels fuller without becoming louder. Joy becomes a background tone rather than a rare event. As this perception stabilizes, you realize that awareness has transformed from a source of pain into a source of peace. The same sensitivity that once made the world feel overwhelming now allows you to access moments of calm and wonder that others may miss. Sensitivity becomes a pathway to quiet happiness. You were never broken. You were never too much. What you called sensitivity was awareness, waking up in a world that survives on numbness. Every lesson you heard was not trying to change you, but to show you that your depth has direction, your empathy has strength, and your perception has purpose. The same awareness that once made life feel heavy can become the quiet force that guides you, protects your peace, and connects you to what is real. When you stop fighting your depth, it stops hurting and starts illuminating. This is not the end of confusion. It is the beginning of clarity. If something in you felt seen tonight, leave a quiet signal in the comments by writing "aware, not weak." It lets others like you know they are not alone in what they feel but rarely say. And if you want more teachings that strengthen your mind without hardening your heart, subscribe to the channel and join this space of calm strength and deep understanding.